truth and nothing but the truth. And we are long past the entire justice enterprise in the United States depends upon an honor system. It depends upon people when they raise their right hands in a courtroom or when they speak to an investigator at a doorway or in an office building. It depends upon them telling the truth. It depends upon them abiding a promise they made to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And we are long past the days when that oath was backed in most people by a fear of going to hell. And so it turns out it's an honor system. To get information, to be able to find the truth, and the truth is a real thing. There are facts, there are things in this life that are verifiable or falsifiable. The entire justice system is built around the notion that the truth can be found to a high degree of confidence. But to find it, you have to count on people to tell it to you. And because they might fear to tell it to you or be motivated by greed or other human flaws not to tell it to you, when you encounter a situation where someone has not told you the truth, as a federal employee, as a Department of Justice lawyer or an investigator, you must pursue that aggressively to send a message to the others who might follow and raise their right hand or speak to an investigating agent, that they will be incentivized to tell the truth, maybe not by fear of going to hell any longer, but by fear of going to jail or being ruined.
This is former FBI Director James Comey. James Comey coming out with a very strident case that, look, people may not be afraid of God for lying in a corrupt system. Fair enough. But at the very least, they need to be terrified of the law, that you would use the iron fist of the law to pound them into the dirt at the point at which they lied to a federal authority or, for that matter, court or in a legislative body. Otherwise, other people will be incentivized to do it. That is the main thesis of what he just pointed out and what he just said. Now, whether you agree with that or not is kind of secondary to the point. Obviously, when Comey said that teaching the American public is what he was doing, effectively giving a tongue rattle to the American public on the notion of justice and the need to tell the truth to people in the Justice Department and Justice Division of this particular country, that he was very strident and he was very clear. The screws need to be put to him. Not being a nice guy, but you need to pound them into the dirt with the iron fists of the law. Fair enough. This is also Comey. When Comey is talking about whether or not leaking information breaches federal law. In fact, let's not even go to that one first. Let's go to this one first. This is also that same Comey who you just heard saying we need to put the screws to people who lie to federal authorities or in positions where you need the truth to be understood.
Director Comey, have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?
Never.
Have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?
No. I needed to get that out into the public square. And so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel.
Director Comey, have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?
Never.
Have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?
No. I needed to get that out into the public square. And so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel.
That's amazing, right? That's amazing. Those videos was from the same guy. We need to put the screws to people who lie to officials and people in positions of power that are asking us questions because we need to be able to get to the truth of the matter. And then, did you ever present information to, let's say, the media or anything else? No, never. I've never done that. I'm James Comey. Chuck Grassley being astute, have you ever handed that information over to somebody else to do that, basically to put it out there into the media or to the press or something like that, effectively hand over documentation? No, I have not done that. I'm also James Comey. 2 months later, you get the secondary or the third clip where Comey is like, well, I put the information out there. I gave it to a friend. I didn't want to do it myself because that would have been grotesquely illegal and, for other reasons. But I gave it to a friend of mine because I wanted him to get the information out, because I wanted to create a special prosecutor in this situation. That's amazing, right? That's amazing. Comey has been indicted. Comey has been indicted. And Comey should be indicted. Two things are true in this. It is a political persecution. Yes. Selective prosecution, as I've always pointed out, selective justice is not justice. By the same token, it doesn't necessarily mean that the individual is not guilty as sin. You heard Comey himself pointed out, yes, I handed the information over to another person. In fact, Richmond was the guy that Comey knew. And to read the indictment, he's obviously guilty based on the indictment of lying to Congress. The problem that I have with this is that people often lie to Congress, and there are very often no repercussions for it. Brennan lied to Congress. Clapper lied to Congress. Lying to Congress is just kind of a thing that people do. By the same token, though, in this case, Trump is going after political opponents, knows that Comey lied to Congress because Comey admitted to lying to Congress, in which case he hired a AG with the explicit purpose of going after his political opponents. This is the indictment. I hope you guys can see this. It's very short, to the point. That's not it. It's which one is it? Which one is it? Which one is it? I know I have it up. Which one is it? Which one is it? Maybe this is it. It's just two of them here. Oh, I see what's going on. I see what's going on. Okay. I'll pull up the indictment. The indictment basically just points out Comey lied to Congress. And Comey tried to obfuscate federal investigations into Comey's lying to Congress. And so, as I point out, he's dead to rights on this particular issue. And considering Comey's previous statement and tongue wag to the American public, you would think that Comey, believing in America and being at one point one of the top spots as a federal agent, meaning he was director of the FBI. The person he handed over to was a man named Richmond, right here. I will show this one, just so you know that he did hand this over. This is clear at this point. On May 16, 2017, Comey provided a separate copy of Memo 4 to Richmond, who was one of Comey's attorneys and a close personal friend. Richmond also had served as special government employee at the FBI during a portion of the time that Comey was FBI director. Comey sent photographs of both pages of Memo 4 to Richmond via text message from Comey's personal cell phone. Comey instructed Richmond to share the contents of Memo 4, but not the memo itself, with a specific reporter for the New York Times. Comey did not seek FBI authorization before providing the contents of Memo 4 through Richmond to a reporter. As noted above, the FBI later marked Memo 4, quote, for official use only, unquote, and determined that it did not contain classified information. We found no evidence of Comey or his attorney released any of the classified information contained in any of the memos to members of the media. To add to that, though, Comey also took steps to get Richmond, or to encourage Richmond, to go out and try to get a special prosecutor, and also to say nice things about Comey in order to boost up Comey himself. To make this even worse, Comey, and right here, this is the indictment proper. I don't think I can make this any larger, so it's kind of hard to see. This part is easy to see. Comey did corruptly endeavor to influence, obstruct, and impede due process or due proper exercise of the power of inquiry under an investigation that was being had before the Senate Judiciary Committee by making false and misleading statements before the committee. What he's being hit with is lying to the committee. The other part, Comey did willfully and knowingly make false, fictitious, and fraudulent statements in a matter within the jurisdiction of the legislative branch of the government of the United States by falsely stating as a United States senator to a United States senator that he did not authorize someone else at the FBI to anonymously source a news reporting regarding the FBI investigation, or let's say investigation concerning, I think this is concerning person one. They're getting him for lying to Congress. They're getting him for lying to Congress. And considering Comey himself has owned up to the fact that he was lying to Congress, that's going to be a tough case. Nevertheless, despite all of this being clear, meaning none of this is within question at this point, Comey did exactly what he is being charged with. Like the drunk cop telling the guy who's on pot that he shouldn't do pot. Comey comes out and makes this statement.
For years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump, but we couldn't imagine ourselves living any other way. We will not live on our knees, and you shouldn't either. Somebody that I love dearly recently said that fear is the tool of a tyrant, and she's right. But I'm not afraid, and I hope you're not either. I hope instead you are engaged, you are paying attention, and you will vote like your beloved country depends upon it, which it does. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial and keep the faith.
Yeah, innocent is not the word I would use for this, but okay. Few points that need to be made on this. Comey is obviously guilty. Comey was obviously involved in the Russiagate scandal. If you remember, Comey is the one who went out, gave the speech about Hillary Clinton, enumerated all of her failures, all of her lying, and then said, but what can you do? In which case, got off the case on Clinton. Operation Hurricane was enacted on Donald Trump. And of course, Clinton stovepiped the information associated with Trump and Russia into the FBI, purchasing the dossier, and they used that as a backdrop to go after Donald Trump. There's that. He's guilty. By his own words, he's guilty. 2, it is a grim day. It is a very grim day that the Justice Department has been politicized to this degree. Part of the reason that nobody trusts Patel, or for that matter, even the Russiagate stuff, has to do with what is an obvious politicization of the Justice Department. When the Justice Department was going after Trump and they were putting lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, how many people, short of Democrats, believe those lawsuits? The one where they tried to get him for hush money payment to a porn star, something that Hillary Clinton effectively got off on and that only got a fine for. And no, Hillary Clinton didn't pay off the porn star, even though that would have been pretty interesting. What Hillary Clinton did was effectively put stuff in her campaign as legal fees. The exact same thing that Donald Trump did for the porn star. These were legal fees. My lawyer handled this. And they went after Trump, trying to put him in a cage. Whereas for Clinton, this is a fine. This is just a fine. The public, I don't know how much of the public, independents, Republicans, or people who are just honest, accepted that as a legitimate case. And of course, going after Trump, just over the document case, despite the fact that Joe Biden had documents for God knows how long, it came across, and not just came across, it was the Justice Department being used as a political cudgel to go after political opponents. That is what it was. Now, for the overthrow of the government, or the attempted overthrow of the government that Donald Trump did, the coup attempt, yes, I thought Trump should have been put in a cage for that, just like Bolsonaro was being put in a cage for the exact same thing. But they didn't put him in a cage, and they let him out. And he was allowed to run again under the laws of this particular country, and he won under the laws of this particular country. If you as a Democrat can't make a case for why somebody who you hit with sexual assault claims, you hit what, 100 felonies or whatever the number of felonies that you hit him with, if you can't beat that guy, that's on you. We all may suffer for it, but we would have suffered either under Democrat or Republican. So my point is this. They politicized the FBI to this degree. Donald Trump comes in and does the exact same thing to the FBI. And you already have Democrats coming out saying, we are now going to politicize and go after our political opponents every bit as much as Republicans did, ignoring the fact that they were doing the same thing for Trump beforehand. This is not a good day. This is a failing of our system, not, an evolution or not a emancipation of our system. Emancipation is the wrong word for it. It's not a good day, let's say, for America when both political parties have decided to use what's supposed to be an independent Justice Department as a political weapon to go after political opposition. Trump is not even hiding the ball. He's screaming at Pam Bondi on Truth Social saying, go after our political opponents. What are you doing? Why have you waited this long to go after and put people in jail? And of course, a few days later, you get the indictment of Comey. Two things are true. Comey is guilty. By the same token, let's be honest, Trump is going after and settling political scores. Whether he's guilty or not is secondary to the point that that is not the way the Justice Department is supposed to be used. Full stop. And I get many on the right are celebrating this. And I guess I don't feel one way or the other about it, since both sides are effectively doing it. It's political grandstanding, political fighting, using the Justice Department to do so. But this is a death spiral. This is not America at its best. This is not even America as a typical republic. This is a failing empire that seems to get more fraught with all sorts of splinters coming out of it the further on it gets. It didn't just start with Trump. Trump is just the next evolution of that decaying, of that process. And you can make an argument and accelerate to that process. This is a failure. It was every bit as much as a failure when Democrats are doing it. It's every bit as much as a failure that Donald Trump is doing it. Again, despite the fact that Comey is guilty of sin. I mean, we need to put it in perspective. The Democrats were trying to run a mass psyop on the United States of America. And on some level, were successful in doing so. Because they couldn't beat Trump, and because Hillary Clinton, the most establishment candidate in the history of candidates, according to her, or at the very least the most experienced, according to her, that she didn't lose her own merits. She lost because Vladimir Putin took Trump up, and like Jesus in the poem Footprints, carrying you through the valley, got him over the finish line. This was all nonsense. This was all lies. This was a psyop created by the Hillary Clinton administration, or I'm sorry, the administration that never took place, to explain why she failed so miserably, but also to damage her political opposition as he took power and to hobble him as he took power. And of course, it worked. I mean, at the end of the day, you ended up with the Mueller investigation. You ended up with oceans and reams of articles going all the way out for the 4 years of its term. People got awards for stuff that never existed. Hillary Clinton was able to get the CIA, the FBI, and the media basically on board for this notion of a dossier that was made up of drunk ramblings pushed into this country by Christopher Steele, a British spook. I'm trying to make the point that this stuff didn't just stop at water's edge. It poisoned the public, especially the Democratic Party, in regards to anything doing with Russia, in which case you get a demented, out of his mind, brain made of jello Joe Biden, doing any and everything in his power to pursue a war that under no circumstance could he pull back from because of the way his particular political party was arranged and set up after that site. So it was not a minor event. It was not a minor thing. I'm trying to make the point that it was very significant in its political repercussions and political outcomes. That being said, let's just be clear. This is not an independent Justice Department. This is not a Justice Department that just so happened to stumble upon something and is now prosecuting a crime. This is the Justice Department with the president openly pushing it to go after his political opponents. And the first political opponent, Comey, will turn himself in, if I'm not mistaken, on Monday to be processed. It's not the first. It's probably not going to be the last. And don't get me wrong, you can feel bad for Comey. I don't know why you would, considering this.
That honor system, the entire justice enterprise in the United States depends upon an honor system. It depends upon people when they raise their right hands in a courtroom or when they speak to an investigator at a doorway or in an office building. It depends upon them telling the truth. It depends upon them abiding a promise they made to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And we are long past the days when that oath was backed in most people by a fear of going to hell. And so it turns out it's an honor system. To get information, to be able to find the truth, and the truth is a real thing. There are facts, there are things in this life that are verifiable or falsifiable. The entire justice system is built around the notion that the truth can be found to a high degree of confidence. But to find it, you have to count on people to tell it to you. And because they might fear to tell it to you or be motivated by greed or other human flaws not to tell it to you, when you encounter a situation where someone has not told you the truth, as a federal employee, as a Department of Justice lawyer or an investigator, you must pursue that aggressively to send a message to the others who might follow and raise their right hand or speak to an investigating agent, that they will be incentivized to tell the truth, maybe not by fear of going to hell any longer, but by fear of going to jail or being ruined. That honor system has to be enforced with an iron fist.
Comey, bro, you have gotten your wish. That honor system will be enforced with an iron fist, with an attorney general powered by a president that is very angry at you and the other Democrats for what you guys put him through over the course of the time when he was in office and in the intervening time period. You lied to authorities. You lied to Congress. According to you, that iron fist needs to be administered brutally and viciously. So the rest of us peons that were not FBI director understand that you shouldn't lie to Congress and you shouldn't lie to feds. You're going to get your wish, Comey. You will get your wish. And I have zero feelings about the fact that you are about to get your wish. I mean, the notion that a Fed lies to Congress, then openly comes out and admits, I lied to Congress. Because at that point, you thought he was safe. Well, Obama's in office. The world is great. Nobody's going to do anything about it. If you indeed put this up before Congress for us, if Congress referred this to the FBI or to the Justice Department, well, obviously, Eric Holder or Loretta Lynch is not going to do anything about it. So I feel safe. I feel spry. So I can now run around and tell the world, I did it. I did it. I gave the memo to a friend. I gave it to a buddy, and I told that buddy to, hey, make me look good. And on top of making me look good, to try to get a special prosecutor to go after the special prosecutor in the matter. That's amazing. That's amazing. Comey will get his wish. Comey will get his wish. When he turns himself in, he'll be processed. And after process, as he said, he wants to fight it out in court, and he will get his day in court. The question, more than anything else, is what are the repercussions for the crime? Because by all metrics, Comey is guilty of sin. Another person who is getting the screws put to him, deservedly so, Nicolas Sarkozy. Nicolas Sarkozy has just been sentenced to 5 years in prison. You may not remember him, but Sarkozy was the French president at one point. He sucked as a president, corrupt as all hell, even by American standards. And Sarkozy, what he did was, to put this succinctly, he gets money from Omar Gaddafi. Gaddafi was, I guess you could say, ruler of Libya. This was when Libya was prosperous, one of the richest countries in Africa, etc. in getting millions of dollars from Libya, he uses that money to win his political campaign. He uses the money that he got from Libya to win his political campaign. He then turned around with Obama and with, I forget who was running Europe or the UK at that point, and murdered Gaddafi. Think about that. Thank you for the cash, bro. Now, for the cash, he was supposed to boost Libya's image, boost Gaddafi's image, and effectively try to bring them back into the political fold of the world international order. So it was a quid pro quo. You give me money for my election, and I will give you political support in the international forum. But then he turned around and murdered Gaddafi with airstrikes and, of course, using terrorists that we called terrorists, despite the fact that many of those people were being paid by us, to create enough of a ruckus and chaos so Obama could use humanitarian bombs in order to, let's say, allow a situation for Gaddafi to be sodomized with a machete. That is what he did. What they caught him on wasn't the overthrow of Libya, nor was it even corruption per se. They caught him, and just to go to the article on this, let's flip to it. Come on. By the way, this is a big deal. This is the first French president to be convicted and put in a cage. The judge even said there are special circumstances in this case where he would go to jail, even with an appeal, meaning as an appeal is going, he will be sitting in a jail cell. So right here, the former French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, said he would, quote, sleep in jail, but with his head held high. Really? This is the third corruption case. If I'm not mistaken, he had an ankle monitor on doing this case because he was convicted in the first case. I don't know why you have your head held high. After receiving a 5-year prison sentence for criminal conspiracy, that's what it was. The first time a former head of state had been sent to prison in modern French history. What is guy named Pedant? I think it's Pedant. During Vichy France, he was put in a cage. But in modern history, he's going in. The verdict and sentencing followed the trial in which his aides were accused of making corruption pact with the regime of the late Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi to receive funding for the 2007 French presidential election campaign. In a surprise ruling, the judge, Gravino, handed down a special form of sentence that means Sarkozy will have to serve a prison term even if he appeals. She justified the move on the grounds that the offenses were of, quote, exceptional gravity and, quote, likely to undermine citizens' trust, unquote. God bless that judge. God bless that judge. Because what the judge is pointing out, look, if we have corrupt political figures, especially as president of France, it makes it look like we're a banana republic. It makes it look as if A, the elections aren't necessarily legit, and B, that your people that you're putting into these political positions are being done so beyond the public concern and more to the point of a corrupt political system. I suspect the political system is corrupt, but that doesn't necessarily stop me from saying good job on the judge for noticing and recognizing that. Sarkozy is going to jail. Sarkozy is going to jail. That is pretty amazing. And apparently, as I said, he's been convicted. This is like his third conviction on corruption. This one with Gaddafi. It's amazing to me that the fact that you overthrew a government, that's not the big deal. It's the fact you took money from that government to run your political election where you were able to win your political election in 2007. That's our issue. Not that you've fundamentally destroyed Libya, the richest country in Africa, where they are now selling slaves, or at the very least they used to sell slaves. That's not their issue. That's not their issue. Just amazing. Just amazing. Oh, okay. Alex is coming on now. So it's no point in going to another story right now. I will say one thing before Alex comes on. Trump has added a new slate of tariffs. Tariffs including on your pharmaceutical industry, where you will now be paying more money for drugs. Congratulations. What? See, this is why doing YouTube is dicey. This is why doing YouTube is dicey. At any moment, YouTube can go back in time and say, hey, we don't like the fact that you did something on the video, so this video is now demonetized. Despite the fact that the video was going for 3-4 months ago, it doesn't stop them from doing it. It is amazing the way their system operates. Let's see, where's Alex? Okay, Alex will be here. Flotilla, fabulous. My man is here. I see him pop in. If you need a moment, Alex, take it. All right, he needs a moment. I'm going to give him that moment. Yeah, Trump has implemented additional tariffs. He's implementing additional tariffs. And we will all suffer for those tariffs.
No, not tariffs. The light.
You love tariffs. You think tariffs are great. When my drug bill goes up, I don't think they're great. How you doing, man? You doing okay today?
I'm doing incredibly well. Thank you, Jamal.
Good. I'm glad you're doing well. And just to give the bio, I want to make sure the audience knows who you are. Alex Krainer. Why can't I give you a bio? There it is. Alex Krainer. He's founder of Krainer Analytics and creator of iSystems Trends Following. He has worked as market analyst, researcher, trader, hedge fund manager since 1996. He has authored several books, including Mastering Uncertainty in Commodities Trading, The Grand Deception, and Alex Krainer's Trend Following Bible. Alex, I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad you're the person that I really want to talk to today.
Good to be with you, Jamal.
You once told me that Donald Trump is trying to crash the U.S. economy and he's doing it on purpose. Now, whether on purpose or not, I have spoken to other economists, and all of you guys are in different, let's say, modes of thinking on either Trump and the economy. And yet you guys are saying something very similar in the sense that, the crypto thing creates a massive amount of uncertainty, kind of like the bubble back in 2006, 2007, that went belly up in regards to the housing mortgage-backed securities, that it's doing that directly with the Treasury. Someone else will point out that there's all sorts of economic issues that are associated with the U.S., where there's a depreciation of the dollar. The depreciation is only going to get worse with the dropping of interest rates. And that there is no way we're ever going to be able to pay back what's going to end up being $40 trillion in a year. And so, meaning you guys are saying different things, but you're singing from the same hymn book in regards to this idea that the U.S. economy is about to take a hit. And I think yours is interesting because you point out they're about to take a hit purposefully.
Yeah, so maybe I didn't explain myself correctly, Jamal. I didn't say that he was going to crash the U.S. economy.
The dollar.
I thought that they might crash the U.S. dollar.
Okay.
Is
there a difference between those things?
Oh, yes. There's a huge difference between those things because the dollar is just, one of the things that circulates in U.S. economy. You need to maintain production of food, production of, everyday needs, apparel, communications, fuel, energy, all of these things need to be produced and they will be exchanged against something. It doesn't have to be the US dollar. Now, the reason why I think that they might do that deliberately are actually a few, but one of them is that's a way to default on your debt, to pay them back in worthless dollars, because there's no way you're paying back $40 trillion of public debt. And that's to say nothing of the other types of debt, the private debts by households, by companies, by banks, and so forth. You arrive north of $110 trillion, which probably works out to more than $500,000 per taxpayer. Jesus. An impossible sum. And all the money that's in circulation today. So we're talking about the monetary base. People can look it up on a Federal Reserve education something. Fred. The website is called Fred. I now forget what it stands for, but FR is for Federal Reserve. So the monetary base arrives at around $6 trillion. So you're
in the United States depends upon an honor system.
I'm sorry, Alex. Please continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So you have $6 trillion as all the money available to service total debt that amount to more than $110 trillion. That's almost 20 times. Okay, so it's not it's simply an impossible situation, and typically governments in those circumstances, to prevent the system from seizing up and collapsing very rapidly, they keep flooding the system with liquidity so that the economy can carry on, so that people continue going to work, that there's gas at the pumps, that there's medicines at the pharmacy, that there's food on the shelves, and so forth. And everybody loses their savings insofar as they are denominated in U.S. dollars, but you don't get situations like the Great Depression, that you have millions of people who die of starvation. Another reason to crash the dollar is, and I actually worked this out pretty late, I would say even maybe a couple of weeks ago. One of the most puzzling aspects of global events to me is the power of the United Kingdom. I couldn't work out, why is Britain so powerful? Their economy is in the dumpster. Their fiscal situation is absolutely catastrophic. So as an economy, they're losing ground rapidly. They have no significant army to speak of. Their navy is Lilliputian. Why are they everywhere? Why are they involved in everything, everywhere around the world? Why are dozens of governments around the world signing all kinds of cooperation agreements with them, military defense pact, and all of this? How is it even possible that they're playing such an important role? And I could see that they act through proxy forces, which are not just foreign proxy armies and governments, but also their own very, very extensive network of intelligence, non-government organizations, private contractors, charitable organizations. They're all linked to British foreign policy in one way or another. Yeah. But they, in and of themselves, they have the appearance of being some private do-gooder organization that is always there to help. And they always go to help to places like Somalia and Syria and Lebanon and Myanmar and Yemen, where then their help is followed by rivers of blood flowing and everything going belly up. And okay, so you realize how they work, but this is hugely extensive. So how is it? Where's it getting the funding? Where's the money coming from? And it turns out, it seems to me that way, it turns out that they control the whole Eurodollar market, or most of it. And I listened to an interview with Alistair MacLeod recently. He's a very, very well-regarded market analyst and a former banker, so he's a reliable source of information as far as I'm concerned. And he said that the size of the Eurodollar market is $10 trillion. So I just told you that the monetary base, the whole, all the dollars in circulation within the United States are about 6 trillion. Eurodollars is about 10 trillion. And that's not circulating in the United States, and it's not necessarily under control of the American government. It's largely under control of the City of London. And most of that money is in the City of London and their associated banks, and in the offshore centers like, British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and so forth. So it seems to me that this is how they manage to stick their dirty fingers into everybody's business everywhere around the world. They have a huge hoard of money with which to make things happen, bribe corrupt politicians, fund their NGOs and charities and intelligence operations and so forth. That's the source of their power. Now, how do you deal with that? how do you disarm them? I think the only way to disarm them is to crash the dollar market completely, to crash the U.S. dollar. That's when their weaponized use of Eurodollars can be collapsed. So you kill two birds with one stone. You collapse the power of Great Britain, and you pay off your debts with worthless paper. And then you obviously need to introduce a new currency, a new monetary system. And I think that's why Trump has Scott Bessent on his side, because he and Steve Mirren that's their domain of expertise. But then hopefully they will also be discussing these things with the Russians, because the Russians have been pondering this problem for a great long time, and I think that they have some solutions they can propose.
Well, the reason I even brought you on in part was because of something that the Russians said. An advisor to Vladimir Putin pointed out that the United States was effectively trying to turn to crypto and move over to crypto with the idea of effectively getting rid of its debt by leveraging other countries around the world to do so. Meaning, the moment that they turn into a cryptocurrency, they can manipulate the market in a way that depreciates the value of the dollar, that makes it impossible to pay it off. Now, mind you, this damages other countries, and even from the standpoint of the United States, I don't know how other countries would even trust it. Give me a take on that. What do you think the response of other countries is going to be?
I think that this is entirely possible, and the thing that really, really makes sense for the United States is to maybe you leave the external dollars be, you leave them as they are, but the domestic circulation, you reset it to a different basis. So maybe you adopt a crypto standard for the domestic circulation, because in this way you insulate the American economy from external shocks, which could happen as an unintended thing, an unintended crisis, or it can happen as an intentional attack. Again, if somebody outside of the United States controls $10 trillion worth of US dollar circulation, well, they have a gun to the head of the American government. So this system is how China in the late 1990s, in 1997, avoided the East Asian financial crisis, because it was a massive financial crisis in 1997 that engulfed all of the East Asian economies except for China. And the way China skated is because they had dual circulation. They have one currency system for foreign trade and investment, and they have a different circulation for domestic use. And so their domestic markets were protected. And I think that Trump and his government will probably attempt to do the same thing. Now, what happens to the foreign holders of the US dollar? They're going to lose, obviously. But, American people didn't elect Trump to worry about foreign holders of American bonds. They elected him to take care of their domestic affairs primarily. And if he does that, then, good for the United States. Everybody else, I've been in the, I'm no longer, I don't work as a hedge fund manager anymore. But, always as an investor, sorry.
You're fine.
As an investor, you're responsible for the performance of your investments. So if you load it up on US debt, you assume the risk that they will collapse. That's a possibility always. You have to take that into account. So that's not for, obviously there's going to be consequences and repercussions. But it's not like today the credibility of American government is this shining, unblemished blessing that everybody takes to the bank without any, U.S. government has broken absolutely every treaty they ever signed with the Native Americans, right? They routinely break treaties and agreements with foreign governments. So there's no loss in damaging U.S. credibility there. It's already shit. Sorry.
You're fine. Yeah, you're fine.
It's already shit. So, what's the loss there? There's nothing much to lose on that side.
But I have to say, though, this is not like a surprise nuclear strike. Like, meaning it's not like, Trump shakes the hand of a guy, turns around, and then they bomb a country. And I'm using that allegory because that's effectively what it's going to be to the economy of the world. And I would wager to the US. This will be a systemic process that people can see coming. And in seeing it coming, aren't those countries are just going to immediately dump dollars? Like, meaning they're not just going to be like, we are just going to stand here and hold the bag as the United States goes through with this process. It is going to hit us. I don't buy the premise that it's not going to hit us.
Well, we will see how it will hit you, but something's going to hit you anyway. It's not like if Trump continued the policies, the economic policies of Biden and Obama and Clinton and so forth, that everything would be swell and everyone would live happily ever after. The system was already on an unsustainable path long before Trump ever came near the White House. Mm-hmm. So something has got to be changed, and there's got to be that cathartic moment when, you unmoor the system from where it's anchored now, and then you're going to go through a bumpy period of transition. But that has to be done. It's not like you can just snap your finger and everything will be better without there ever being any kind of a crisis, any kind of a, some people are going to lose in the process, some people are going to gain in the process. Mm-hmm. But the people who have been gaining like gangsters for decades now are the people sitting in Wall Street. Do we need to protect that system? And they've been splurging their largesse on the military industrial complex, on the big agriculture, on the big tech, on the big ag, on all of these industry cartels that were milking the American economy and the American people for decades upon decades upon decades. Do we need to protect the system that coddles them and gives them all these privileges? And then when excrement hits the fan, they go like, well, let's go to war now.
Mm-hmm. But do you think they will be in the best position in order to take advantage of that system, of that changeover? Or who do you think
who is in the best position?
The same people from Wall Street, meaning people of means. If I'm Elon Musk and I have, $1 trillion at this point, am I in a better position to take advantage of it? If I'm Zuckerberg, if I'm Bezos, add any rando oligarch you want to add into it. Like, I guess what I'm asking is, who is in the best position to take advantage of that changeover?
Well, look, the more wealth you own, the better your position. That's obvious. But that doesn't mean that they're going to take advantage of that position, because usually people of privilege concentrate on trying to preserve that privilege. They're not going to stop and say, this is going to change. This is not going to continue this way. So maybe we're going to, leave these old type businesses behind, and I'm not going to run Amazon anymore. I'm going to develop a chain of mom and pop stores and support local small and medium-sized businesses around the country. They're probably not going to do that. Let's say if Trump ends up implementing policies that I think he will implement, it's going to be to the advantage of ordinary people, ordinary entrepreneurs, small and medium-sized businesses, because that's the only way you lift the United States back out of its crisis. Small and medium-sized enterprise in virtually all countries are the main driver of employment. Like they create something like 70% of all employment in all economies. They're the engine of innovation. They're the engine of foreign trade, but they need they need protective barriers. They need tariffs to protect them from foreign competition. And so that has to be done. And that's obviously going to be one of these bumpy discontinuities that are going to cause an uncomfortable transition. It may take a generation for all of this to crystallize to something. It may take 20 years. But nevertheless, it has to be done. If you want to bring industries back home, you're going to be able to bring some of these large industries in the space of a few years. Car assembly plants and aircraft. Big businesses. But the small and medium-sized enterprise, they have to come from the ground up, which means that many of them are going to start from scratch, and hopefully they will have credit available to them at favorable terms. Secure long-term credit, not like today where the bank gives you credit when you don't need it. Then when you need it, they yank it away and they cause mass bankruptcies. And so you have a lot of businesses that could be successful, but for the banking system, and that has to change.
But Trump is only going to be in power for 3 years. The next president, and I'm telling you what's going to happen. When people feel economic pain and they see the country in a recession, which we will go into a recession as he goes about this, they will change horses, and they would do it in a heartbeat. It's like we even have a saying, it's the economy, stupid. It's the economy, stupid. We don't care about the wars. We don't care about murdering people abroad. When it comes to, he's making us poor. I give an example, the farmers. Donald Trump has decimated the farming industry in the United States with his tariffs. When people are paying more for drug costs, which are already astronomical in the United States, you really think that they're going to sign on to this process of self-immiseration with an administration that is causing that immiseration and ride that boat out for 20 years? We don't make long-term plans in the U.S.
But why do you say that Donald Trump decimated the farming industry? Was it doing well before he came to the White House 8 months ago?
Well, even in the first term, if you remember, Donald Trump passed sanctions against China, and passing sanctions against China, you lost the market of 1.4 billion people, in which case that market evaporated, in which case the farmers are now out there praying for God to help them out. Like literally, I can show you the video of them praying to Jesus for help. Trump, if I'm not mistaken, in the first term had to actually give them effectively welfare in order to keep them afloat. And he's probably going to have to do something similar this time around. So yes.
I don't know, Jamal. Farming has been under attack for decades now. And it's under attack in Europe as well. And Trump is not the president in Europe. I mean, I see it around me. You've seen protests in Germany, in Holland, in Britain. Farmers are pressed to the edge of existence. They're one of the cohorts with highest rate of suicide in Germany, in France. In Croatia, they're slaughtering livestock by the tens of thousands under whatever pretext. This is not Trump. This is Agenda 2030. You can't lay everything on in front of Trump's feet. We have to be a bit more rigorous about the way we analyze things that are going on. And it can't be Trump on everything. There's if we misidentify the cause and we misdiagnose the crisis, we're not going to solve it.
Alex, that goes for both of us. I agree with you. But I'm not laying everything at Trump's feet. I'm pointing out that the farming industry in the U.S. took a direct hit. Farmers were not on welfare before Donald Trump passed sanctions, in which case China responded by their counter sanctions, and they targeted Trump's base, which was the farming communities in places like Iowa, et cetera. That's not everything. That's something very specific that I'm bringing up. I mean, I don't know your situation.
Well,
just to be fair.
American farming has been distorted. Well, I don't know if distorted is the right word, but it has been misguided for many decades now. American farmers are people who produce mountains of corn, soybean, wheat, oats, sugar, basically cash crops. They ride on $2 million John Deere tractors as they scroll on the internet, and they grow monocultures, like whole country, a small country size of soybeans.
Yes.
And then you need to sell them to China because, you're not going to sell it to consumers, right?
Yes.
So the whole
the
farming sector has to be reformed so that, when you talk about farmers, you're not talking about Conagra and how do you call it? Monsanto and people like that. Of course, these people have money to pay actors to pretend to be desperate farmers and cry for cameras. So people say, "Oh, Trump is attacking the farmers." He's attacking Conagra. He's attacking Monsanto. He's attacking these giants that live on government subsidies. And of course, the actual farmers, the ones that actually sit in those tractors, they end up getting crumbs off the table. But we're talking about multinational corporations. That's who the farmers are in the United States. Transition to diversified family farming, where you have, a bit of wheat and a bit of oats and some vegetables and fruits and pigs and chickens and eggs, all produced in a healthy way on healthy land without toxic chemicals. That's not going to happen overnight. That's also, and if I were Trump, I would be attacking the current system of food production, because not only is it wasteful and harvests these mountains of cash crop monocultures that need to be dumped on the world, they're strengthening the hand of the big ag, and they're making people unhealthy, and they're being environmentally horrible. They're destroying the land as well. And then obviously there's going to be some farmers who have bought into this and who are this deep in debt because they had to buy those John Deere $2 million tractors. Well, they are going to cry. But what do? Do you continue growing millions of tons of soybeans?
I feel you. No, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. I was just agreeing with you. I do get it. Like I get your point that any changeover is going to require, quote unquote, a changeover. And look, sugar is subsidized in this country. I mean, there's a reason.
Oh yeah, so are soybeans, so is rice. And nobody cares. Nobody cares. That's not socialism. If government gives money to big corporations, awesome. If government gives money to ordinary people, socialism, communism, death. Let's hang them all.
Okay, fair enough. I understand your point. By the way, what do you think this is going to look like for the rest of the world? I mean, let's say, I strongly suspect that countries are going to start offloading dollars the moment that they see the U.S. move in a particular direction. The U.S. is not this indispensable nation in the way that we see ourselves. We're not this Allen fortress. I mean, that was made clear when the United States tried to do a tariff war across the world, and many countries told the U.S. to F off. What do you think happens in the material world when this changeover takes place, if he does indeed try to go to cryptocurrency, if he does indeed try to, let's say, leverage the rest of the world in order to pay down the deficit? How do you think they respond, and what do you think they do?
There's going to be transition. They're going to have to adapt. Fortunately, today we have alternatives, which is, BRICS, Belt and Road Initiative. We have Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a security building a security architecture for the world, or at least for the Eurasian landmass. And there's going to be losers. There's going to be big losers in this whole transition. And because, since World War II, pretty much, commodity exporting countries, oil exporting nations, and all others, they have been selling their commodities for US dollars. They have accumulated large reserves of US dollars at the Federal Reserve Bank.
Yes.
They got caught in that. They got caught in that system, and they have been coerced into that system, by British and American diplomacy and foreign policy apparatus. They enjoyed it because they were able to buy, fancy yachts and apartments in New York City and the south of France and in London and Geneva and so forth. But they are going to have to be weaned off of that system, and they're going to have to develop their economies in a different way. And I think that largely this is already being done. Many nations are making this transition. They are increasingly trading with other countries in their own currencies, meaning they're no longer accumulating large US dollar sums at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. They are joining the BRICS organization. They are trading with China in Chinese currency. Mm-hmm. And as a collective, the BRICS nations, they might come up with their own trade settlement currency and their own reserve currency. Or, I don't know in what form that's going to be done yet and when. But that's an alternative. Maybe before, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 years ago, there was no alternative. Everything was West-centric. So if you didn't want to be a closed-off autarky like North Korea, you had to, enter that matrix. You had to trade in US dollars or euros or pounds. You had to do what was necessary not to be sanctioned and embargoed. And so that's the reality that everybody pretty much got caught with. And we're still caught in that. And they're still trying to preserve that system, and they're still attacking the population, trying to rip every last shred of their sovereignty. They're destroying food production, particularly in Europe. And it's going to be a crisis period, but it's not like if everything remained as is, mm-hmm. that everything would be wonderful, because it's not wonderful. I mean, we already had the experience with the pandemic, and them wanting to introduce the digital IDs, and them wanting to, introduce this draconian censorship and CBDCs, and, measuring our individual carbon footprint for everything we do, subjecting us to biannual booster shots and all this. This was not a bright future for us. So we're going to have to go through a bumpy period of transition, but I welcome that, because otherwise, you can look forward to a future that's possibly worse than just death.
Let's dig into that part for a bit. What do you see if there's no changeover? Regardless of what you believe Donald Trump is trying to do and what the way and the direction that he's pushing, if nothing changed, what do you see?
If there's no changeover, then I see decay and revolution, because people are already on the verge of a revolt, and I'll give you an example about how deep the discontent goes. I was just in Croatia recently, mm-hmm. and there's this insane scheme, and I swear Trump's not behind it, where they're bringing in migrants from Nepal, from India, from the Philippines, and the government is subsidizing businesses in Croatia to hire these immigrants. the government is giving them 600 euros per person per month to hire them. And these immigrants work for an average of 800 euros a month, while the average salary in Croatia is, I think, about 1,000 something, maybe 1,300. I don't know exactly, but something in that neighborhood. So if you're a business, thanks to these government subsidies, you can hire a Nepalese, pay him 800 euros per month, of which the government gives you 600. So you practically get a slave for like a token amount of 200 euros per month.
Yeah.
And that's the job that's yanked from under a native-born Croatian person because those subsidies are not available to Croatian people. So if you want to hire a Croat, you have to pay him the full salary plus everything, you know. So you ends up costing you about 2,000 euros per month on average salary, whereas you get a Nepalese for 200. That is a shocking treason, and people see it. Okay, while at the same time they're destroying our agricultural production. And this same thing is going on in Italy, in Germany, in Belgium, in Spain, in France, everywhere. And I'm telling you, there's going to be some triggering event where people are just going to overthrow the governments, particularly because in Europe they're not allowing us to even have elections. Or if we like a candidate that wants to change things, then they use lawfare or bullets or whatever else to make sure we can't vote for that candidate. We have to vote for some loser who is on the globalist side. But this happened in Slovakia and Romania and France and Germany. They had 7 candidates of the AfD party in Rhineland-Westphalia who like dropped dead in the space of 2 weeks before the elections. People are seeing this. And the grievances are run very deep, and something's going to happen. I don't know what. I don't. You can't predict these events, but otherwise they're just taking us down the road to serfdom and slavery. And I'm at a point where I don't necessarily want my children to continue living here if nothing changes. And so, people will leave, or they will have to rise up and overthrow the governments as they are now. So that means that we also get a transition, but it might be even bumpier than in the United States. And then, thankfully, again, there's the alternative, and I think that we're going to be able to transition to realigning our political, economic, social development to these multipolar integrations, to BRICS. So it's not necessarily going to be chaos, everybody going to war against everybody, revolutions, beheadings, guillotines in town squares, and so forth.
It's like King Louis just takes the L. What do you make of Donald Trump's tweet recently, where he comes out seemingly effectively throws everything onto the Europeans, tell the Europeans, hey, you're holding the bag. I think Ukraine will be able to do great. I think they can take back all of their territory. Hell, they can take more territory. And he's like, anyway, I wish all of you well. Like, that tweet is amazing to me, right? Yeah. So Kaylis, who as the audience knows, I have a bit of a crush on, she comes out and points out that they know I lust after her pretty badly. It's horrible. It's shameless. But Kaylis comes out and says the quiet part aloud. The EU diplomat warns Trump that Europe can't shoulder Ukraine burden alone. And she points out, in a moment of, I guess, rare clarity, he was the one who promised to stop the killing, so it's not entirely on us. And she also points out, she says, this is what the article is pointing out. While many European officials welcome the more supportive shift, by the way, it was not a more supportive shift. The Wall Street Journal even points out that no policy has changed at all. It says towards Ukraine, they caution that Trump might be suggesting that he intends to pull back American involvement and absolve Washington of responsibility. That's not a suggestion. That was literally the tweet. Europe would do great. I think Ukraine can take everything back with Europe's help. And even at the very end of it, this, hey, we're going to still supply weapons to NATO, and Europe and NATO can do whatever they want with those weapons. Is this Trump trying to make Europe a fall guy? That he knows that this project is up, the jig is up, and that he ultimately wants to blame Europe for any calamity that takes place with Ukraine, passing it effectively off, saying this is Europe's war now, this is Europe doing this is Europe, et cetera, et cetera. Give me your thoughts on that tweet.
No, that's very clearly the case. And rightly so, because the Europeans have been absolutely desperate for the war to carry on. They didn't want peace. They refused any talks with the Russians. They still want to kill the Russians. They still want long-range missiles. They want the United States to issue a security guarantee. You know, security guarantee sounds like some piece of paper. Security guarantee means World War III. Okay, yeah. They don't care. They want to destroy Russia, and if it takes World War III, and if it takes the United States completely destroying its economy, its military, its prosperity in the world, ends up risking nuclear holocaust, doesn't matter. Let's get it done. And so now that Trump's saying, like, you guys are doing great, carry on. I even have weapons for you to sell you. That's kind of like, you know, like when you tell these Ukrainian trolls online who are, you know, sitting somewhere in London and
yes,
pounding their chest with you know, Ukrainian patriotism. You tell them, why don't you put on an orange jumpsuit, grab a gun, and go fight since you think this war is so great.
Yeah.
So this is Trump's way of saying the same. I don't know why he, as the president of the United States, has to act like a juvenile thug about it, you know?
Oh, I see. Right.
You know, he's the president of the United States. You know, he should communicate with certain decorum, you know, with certain dignity. I don't understand why he has to. I don't know, you know, maybe his approach was formed in World Wrestling Federation, you know, the trash talk and the nonsense. And maybe that works for some audiences, but this is, you know, the whole world is reading this stuff. And maybe he's doing it on purpose to get everybody's heads to explode and talk about that tweet while he's done who knows what else that went unnoticed because everybody's losing their mind about his thuggish words and style, and you know, people feel embarrassed, you know, like, okay, so you know, you kind of see that his point. It is on the Europeans, rightly, but do you have to embarrass us in front of the whole world like this? I mean, you know, it'd be nice for the American people to see their president and to say, like, that's my president. Yes. He could give him that, because, you know, national pride is a real thing. It's not just a fresh coat of painting on your house. It's how the whole nation breathes and feels, and you know, you got to be respectful of that, and he's not. That's where I have a serious criticism of Trump.
Yeah, I think from Trump's point of view, everyone else is a vassal, and he's effectively king of the world. And you know, I don't know if he looks at it in the sense of, well, I need to talk to people who are not my equals equally. It's like if a guy ran a business, some people are polite in the business when they're talking to the employees. some are not, because from their point of view, I pay you, your very air that you breathe is coming from me. So I will talk to you in the way that I want to talk to you. I think he hates these people, or at the very least, he has nothing but contempt for Europe. And so when he talks about it, he throws out, hey, man, Russia's doing horribly. Their economy sucks. So I think Europe can handle it now. Like, it's a very strategic post.
No, absolutely. I agree with all that. I agree with all of that. But, maybe a bit more class to the whole thing,
Agreed. No, I agree. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that.
He should have his wife write his tweets, probably, She would probably have a bit of that class that he could use.
Are Europeans going to be willing to go and die for Starmer, Merz?
Hell no. But Ukrainians didn't want to go die for Zelensky either. That's the problem. That's what scares me, is because these degenerate parasites that are ruling over us, they have their methods of social engineering to coerce people to war. And then if they're not going to be coerced, then, they've already fielded these armies of brown shirts everywhere that just ambush you, stick you in a van, force you in a uniform, and march you off to the front, where you get killed in probably a couple of hours.
Yeah.
But they're doing it. They're doing it, in tens of thousands. And so that's, the fact that people don't want to go to war, we shouldn't be complacent and think that, they're not going to go, because they are preparing these means of coercion. And that's part of the reason why they're destroying European economy. Because, people who are prosperous, who have good long-term jobs and enjoy their lives, they don't think about, hey, let's go hate on Russia and let's go kill them. You have to first dump them on the street and rob them of their future. And then tell them, hey, you want some meaning to your life? You can go to war. Besides, everything that's wrong in this country is Russia's fault. So, be a man, grab a gun, and go kill them. And then, that whole train starts rolling.
Do you think that's going to work? I mean, like, you're in Europe, I'm not. Who do they attribute their difficulties to? Do they attribute it to their government, or do they attribute it externally? Because just for one point on this, when Merz goes out, tells the German people, hey, we need to cut back on benefits. That's what we need to do. When you see all of these German jobs that are going up in smoke, I mean, they're like have these mass layoffs. They've been in recession for like 2 years. You look at you look at France, whose government just collapsed. You look at the UK and France, where screaming headlines come out saying they may need an IMF loan because their budgets are just so in tatters. Are they blaming their own government for that? And can that really be transferred into a foreign entity?
Well, you can do all kinds of things with propaganda. And this is why I think it's not going to work. Once upon a time, when we all depended on radio and television and newspapers to know what's going on in the world, it was very easy for them to control the narrative. Mm-hmm. And they didn't hesitate to lie, to invent stories. And, in that environment, you can blame everything on the Russians. And there's going to be some people who know the truth, but they're not going to have access to the megaphone, right? And so you don't have to convince everybody. It's enough that you convince the critical mass of the people. And then if they're still hesitant, then you stage a false flag event.
Right.
And you say like, oh my God, they attacked our boys in the Gulf of Tonkin. To war,
Yeah.
But we have these conversations now, and many people are hearing them. And so there's a doubt. Some people know that the government's lying to them. Others doubt. There's always going to be a sliver of the population who's just going to believe whatever you tell them, but probably not enough to to mobilize a whole society war effort. And also, I think it's too late. I think it takes probably at least 5 to 10 years to organize an effective mobilization, because you need to boost the arsenals, you need to prepare a lot of tanks and howitzers and cannons, and train up the troops, and build up the whole will to go to war.
Yeah.
And Europe is at the beginning of this, and then NATO is about to fall apart. So as they're funding the NATO, they're already talking about, no, we need a European army.
Mm-hmm.
The European army, what's that? That's like 29 countries speaking 20-some languages. You can't even begin to organize a European army. So it's far too late. The whole horse long bolted out of the stables, and these people are grasping at straws. They're desperate to try to preserve themselves and their system and their hold of the levers of power. But it's going to be too late, too little. By the time they even begin to organize themselves, Russia will have prevailed in Ukraine, and then it's going to be very, very difficult for them to start a whole new war somewhere else, or again in Ukraine. But after you had the armistice, after you had the peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine, and between Russia and the United States, maybe even, then you have to provoke a whole new war. How are you going to do that? That itself it took the British more than 20 years to bring World War I together. They started in the late 1800s. In the 1890s, they already started looking for ways to impose a war on Germany. And they were successful in 1914. So, by that time, there will have been a revolution if they don't change course away from war towards peaceful coexistence with Russia, with economic cooperation, buying Russia's energy again, because we need it. It's not going to magically come from Mars.
Yeah.
What they have now is everything costs 3-4 times more than what we were paying to the Russians before.
You would think people will be rioting in the streets over that. I mean, when that took place in France, the Yellow Vest movement, Macron tried to put, it was like trying to double the feud costs of regular Parisians or people from France. And the Yellow Vest movement went on for 2 years? I think it had 70%, 80% support of the public at that point.
Yes. But then we had COVID. Then we got a brand new invisible enemy, and everybody had to stay home. And it's hard to make those protests when you have to have 6 feet between. The only protests that were safe back then were Antifa protests and LGBT parades. Those were safe. I'm not a doctor. I don't know how that works, but ordinary protests were not safe. They were forbidden.
They were 6 feet apart, Alex.
Yeah. If you could keep 6 feet apart, but people they forget, and then you could cause such a disaster. The virus would just go everywhere. You would jeopardize public health.
Yeah. I guess the last question on that front is a trigger. So they've already been doing the false flags, as you've noticed. Russia has invaded Estonia. Oh my God, drones have flown into Poland. And they seem to be setting that up for this potential. What it comes across as, give me a take on this. It looks like they recognize that the Ukrainian military is getting fraught, is getting far more desperate, and its capability on the battlefield is lessening. There might be like a 40% capability at this point for all of the people that have effectively either been killed or has just fled or body has been damaged where they can't necessarily fight anymore. You can only grab so many people off the streets. So people walking their dogs, haberdashers, disco people who are dancers or whatever. You can only grab so many of those people, and those people are going to effectively die very quickly on the battlefield. Europe seems to know this. And this seems to be, and I could be wrong on this, part of the rationale for why they're now drumming up these false flags. Oh, we're going to shoot down a Russian jet if another one comes through our airspace. Like, these are games, dangerous games that they're playing, but it reeks of a certain amount of desperation. They seem to want to put troops into Ukraine before the Ukrainian military falls. Do you think they're going to be able to do that? Because at that point, you don't have to draft the public. You just put in 5,000 or 10,000 people as cannon fodder. That could be a trigger to try to get, a larger military, to try to create a justification for get further involved in the conflict.
Yes, correct. You're absolutely correct. And this was exactly where U.S. security guarantee was the crucial element in the whole thing, because that was exactly the idea. The reason why the Europeans wanted a security guarantee is because they were exactly planning to put these tripwire troops into Ukraine, so that when they come under Russian attack, then they would call on the United States and say, like, oh, look what the evil Russians did to us. Now you have to make good on your security guarantee.
Yes.
But Trump yanked that from under them. And now I think that Europe, if they shook down all their potential or all their capabilities, I think they probably couldn't even dream to put 50,000 troops into Ukraine.
Yeah.
So it's completely pointless. There's no way, there's no reason. And then, without the United States, their logistic systems, satellite intelligence, targeting systems, nothing holds together. Everything is a patchwork of measures with which you can maybe blow something up here and there, but you're basically going to get killed very quickly. And so, they are desperate enough that they want to do this. I think that this was the case with World War I and World War II. The British imperial cabal always thinks, well, if we get ourselves into a big trouble in Ukraine, the Americans will have no choice but to come to our aid. So let's just go do it. Let's just go do it. And then we're going to, create this whole, because they control the media. Oh, how can you possibly leave us, alone? How can you abandon us in this hour of need? Look at what the Russians are doing to us. So, they might try that. These false flag attacks that they have been doing in Poland and Denmark and Ursula von der Leyen's plane and so forth, they're so amateurish, they're so unconvincing that I'm puzzled. Are they that stupid? Or is there a different? Here's my suspicion. My suspicion is that by repeating all these stupid things, they are getting us used to the possibility that Russians are doing this. You're thinking like, no, probably this is idiotic, but who knows? Maybe the Russians are trolling us. Maybe they are testing us out, And then when you got people acclimated to this, that something might be going on, then you do the real false flag attack. And what I'm worried about is a nuclear device or a dirty bomb going off in the city of London, or in London. Because last September, it came to my attention that all the webcams in London have gone dark all at once. And they are still dark to this day. There's a handful that are still active, like Abbey Road one, and maybe one or two other ones, but literally hundreds of webcams that for years and years and years, you could log into and you could see London real time. They all went dark. And that's not a random event, particularly since they didn't put them back for a year now.
Yeah.
So it tells me that they're planning something. Are they going to execute that plan? We'll find out. But I suspect that these stupid little false flags that convince nobody are being done repeatedly simply to, make a portion of European population think, maybe it is the Russians. They're even doing the polls afterwards to ask people, so what did you think? And then in Poland, did you see in Poland it turns out that 34% people think that it could have been the Russians.
Right.
38% think it was the Ukrainians.
Yes.
But that's 34% that think it might have been Russians. And then you do another one, and then you do another one, and now you have 34% is not a small number. And so if you do that in every country, and everybody's talking about this for weeks, and then you do a real big one in London, then maybe you have galvanized people for war. Maybe there's going to be a more significant readiness to go and confront Russia.
Yeah, I hate to agree with you on that, but I agree with you on it. I mean, the 34%, but that's 34% with massive amounts of propaganda. But even
well, massive propaganda is a given. That's not going away.
One last question before I let you go. If they do that, do you think Trump gets involved? Meaning, Europe clearly believes that Trump will get involved. Otherwise, all of this provocation wouldn't make sense, right? So in their minds, they think there's no way America would let us do this on our own. And what's her name? Kalis. Kalis is dumb as a box of rocks. And one of the things that she pointed out, she says, the U.S. is NATO. She's not wrong on that. So I guess the question becomes, does Donald Trump come to the aid of Europe when they declare Article 5 has been breached? We have assessed that the Russians have committed some false flag that for whatever reason, the Russians committed. Putin's a bad guy. That's all we need. And we expect Donald Trump to come to our rescue now that we are in a war that we are obviously going to lose. Does Trump do it?
I think that if you went to the White House today and asked Donald Trump, he would tell you, no way, no how. We're not doing that. But
pressure.
Pressure, exactly. They in 2019, the British tried to maneuver Trump into launching a war against Iran. And a lot of this stuff leaked out via the anonymous organization, the hackers or whatever they are.
Yes.
And the then British ambassador to Washington, D.C. was talking about surrounding Trump with Trump whisperers and flooding the zones around him, because they knew that he was unwilling. They knew that he didn't want to go to war against Iran, but they thought if they just pressured him and talked him into it, that he might do it. Like he got Qasem Soleimani assassinated, which was one of the dumbest things he's ever done, probably. But he had there Pompeo and John Bolton, and so that happened. So if a big false flag happened, which will immediately be followed by a massive propaganda push, that those stories have already been written. Mm-hmm. And then they're going to flood through, the British 77th Battalion and all these keyboard warriors everywhere. It's going to flood into social media, and you're going to see no end of stories about how evil the Russians are and how poor the British people are and how poor the Ukrainian freedom fighters are. And that's just going to keep rolling and rolling and rolling. The American press, which is also controlled by the City of London, largely through Rupert Murdoch, but through others as well.
Yeah.
They're going to step into it full power, and then who knows what might happen. People are going to say, like, well, these Russians are really terrible. Putin is new Hitler. I was wrong before. I changed my mind. Let's go. So, you know, we can't be complacent about this. This could happen.
Alex, that is terrifying. That is really terrifying.
Yeah, we have to keep doing our things. We have to keep pushing back against propaganda. We have to fight for freedom of speech and defend it. We have to fight for peace and defend it, and never give up. You know, we might fail, but we can only fail doing our best. You know, leaving it on the field.
Alex Krainer, thank you for this, man. You are
Jamar,
fantastic.
always fun. Always enjoy chatting with you. Until the next time.
You have a good one, man. You be safe, okay?
You too. Take care.
All right. And just for the audience, Alex Krainer. Alex Krainer is founder of Krainer Analytics and creator of iSystems Trends Following. He has worked as a market analyst, researcher, trader, hedge fund manager since 1996. He is no longer a hedge fund manager, but he did for a while. He has authored several books, including Mastering Uncertainty in Commodities Trading, The Grand Deception, and Alex Krainer's Trend Following Bible. Alex is fascinating to me, honest to God. How can I want to put this accurately? He is one of those people that I so disagree with on details, but agree with his wants, if that makes sense. Have you ever met like a lefty? And you guys, for the most part, have the same political ambitions. These are the things that we want to see take place in the world. But you never agree on the details of what is taking place and how do you get those things. That's what I feel about Alex, where he would say, yeah, I don't like the way Trump talks. Yeah, I don't want us to go to war in Iran. No, I don't want us to fight the Russians. Yeah, the Ukraine thing was a boondoggle. And I was like, yeah, I agree with all that. Everything that you just said on that, I agree with. Our farmers or our food needs to be better. But we shouldn't just have monograin crops. We're subsidizing horrible stuff that is making people sick. Again, agreed. But then it comes down to, and I think Trump is fighting for freedom and democracy. It's like, okay, he lost me. He lost me. It's that part, right? That's why I was always fascinated talking to him. It gives an alternate point of view from my own point of view that I appreciate from somebody who seemingly wants very similar things, even though I think this belief in Trump is misguided. And him and I have had those conversations. We don't need to have that fight every time he comes on air. But he has a model of the world. And in his model of the world, Donald Trump is taking a certain action that I just don't buy. I don't think Trump is taking those actions, even though I totally understand what his wants and I get his wants. And I, in large part, agree with his wants. It's a fascinating conversation. Some of you may agree with Alex in regards to what he believes Donald Trump is doing. That is perfectly fine. I bring him on so we can have that conversation. It doesn't need to be a direct back and forth on it every show. You can look back at our old episodes and find those direct back and forths. But an alternate point of view, it's not a horrible thing. And I suppose he would agree with me, not bringing up what happened yesterday, but I guess I am. The president does have power. I mean, Donald Trump calling a tariff war against the entirety of the world is the president exerting power. It's dumb power, but it's power. And that is not power that the rich wanted. That is not power that people who are buying treasuries wanted. That is Donald Trump coming up with his own assessment and deciding to go through with a plan that, yes, is damaging America. Meaning, when Donald Trump is doing this stuff, what is Trump's argument? He's fighting the globalists. That's Alex Jones' argument, right? He's fighting the globalists. He's fighting the wealthy, the people who put him in power. Now, Trump is a globalist. I don't know where these people get this idea that Donald Trump is fighting the globalists. But I will tell you this. Putting tariffs on all of these countries, it's not benefiting anybody, especially people who are giving Donald Trump money. Pharmaceutical industry, 100% tariffs. 50% tariffs on kitchen cabinets, 50% tariffs on bathroom vanities and associated products, 30% tariffs on upholstered furniture, 25% tariffs on heavy trucks. And of course, he wants to cut the interest rate because obviously these tariffs are going to make things much more expensive for Americans. The problem with cutting the interest rate is that you also increase inflation. So not only has the dollar been depreciated, which it is, you can see it's gone down like a rock, but the amount that people are spending on things that are vital necessities, pharmaceuticals are vital necessities. If you're already paying a ton of money when you go to the drugstore, and now that money is going to have to go up further. I know people who weren't able to get certain medications because they can't afford to get those medications. That's even with the pharmacy putting every deal and sale and every insurance thing that they could put onto that particular product. They still couldn't afford that product. I would tell you for myself, transplant medication, don't ask me the name of the drug because I can't think of it. It came in a very big white bottle, was $300 a month. That's with insurance. Medicaid doesn't pay for pills and stuff like that. You got to pay out of pocket on some level. And even with insurance, the amount of the money is high. Also, who is Trump going to sell this stuff to? So say for the moment that Donald Trump is able to create industries in the United States, which I don't buy. But let's say he does that. And in producing these industries, you got to pay the wage, 15, 20 bucks, depending on the job. Industry, regulation, etc. All of those things have to take place. You need an educated workforce, which, again, the skills in America has been depreciated because America does a lot of BS jobs. But let's say that he overcomes all of those things in 3 years, which, again, I don't buy. Who do you sell it to? How do you sell a product that was made in Nepal or made in China or made in India or made in a country that they could pay very low wages to for various reasons? We had Jason Smith on the show explaining how China does it. How do you sell that product back to Nepal, to India, to China at the price point that America would need to make that product at? Meaning not only are Americans going to have to pay more, when you sell that product back out to the world, which you would want to do because you only have 350 million Americans, how do other countries buy that product? And when those other countries just buy another product as opposed to buying the American product at that particular price point? I understand passing tariffs in order to protect certain industries. We have tariffs on our car industries, for example, to protect car industries. But randomly, out of the blue, without forethought, coming out and waging a tariff war on the world. I don't even know how this works. I mean, Donald Trump supposedly made deals with various countries, vassal states of the European Union, for example. So what, you're also going to hit them with 100% on drug costs if it's coming out of Europe? Is that how that works? Those idiots would pay it. They would pay it. It's Europe, right? I'm trying to point out that this is going to dramatically hit Americans also. We're going to take the brunt of this. Not only are the prices going to go up, the cost of the dollar or the value of the dollar has dropped, which means it is up that much higher for cost of these items. Jerome Powell came out with a really interesting speech, and Jerome Powell made the point of saying, basically showing annoyance, recognizing that the tariffs is pushing the U.S. into a recession, and is dropping the interest rate as a result of it, after he enumerates why he's dropping the interest rates and the damage that has been taking place to America in regards to recession fears. It's only going to get worse. You've been warned. I've been saying stagflation for 6 months? Mark my words. Mark my words. Before our next guest comes on, we have a fantastic guest coming up. In fact, the next two guests are also going to be really good. We have Craig, how do I pronounce this name? Mokhiber. I think that's his name, Craig Mokhiber. Shout out to Dimitri Lascaris for this one. He sent me the video that he did with Craig. They had an interesting conversation about, let's say, international law, and where some countries may be using it to hide behind international law. Dimitri was making this kind of assertive argument of, no, this is not something to hide behind. This is something to be aggressive about, where a world should not allow genocide, full stop. And that there's, let's say, an assertive push in the United Nations let's say, law against it. And of course, we had somebody else on the channel who didn't believe that and believed that countries had every right to hide behind, quote unquote, international law that was flagrantly being violated by another country under the United Nations. We disagree. Fair enough. But Craig effectively made that argument to Dimitri. Now, why would Craig know? Craig would know because Craig is a former United Nations human rights official and a specialist in international human rights law. He's the guy to talk to on it. And so we will have that conversation. Craig will be on in roughly 14 minutes, give or take. While I have 15 minutes, I want to wait for Marandi to talk about that one. There are a few topics I want to hit with Marandi. But this is my baby. This is my baby. All right, so let's talk UFOs. And I mean in the literal sense.
NATO and the EU about this incident. The Danish Minister of Defence, a man called Truls Lund Poulsen, who has said that Denmark have reached out to both NATO and the European Union to discuss those drone incidents, as a number of drones were sighted around Aalborg Airport in the north of Denmark.
Now, Denmark is having a drone flight. And they're saying all of these drones that are effectively going through their airspace, shutting down flights and those type of things. And they don't necessarily know where they're coming from or who to attribute them to. Obviously, because it's Europe, they're going to blame the Russians. The problem with blaming the Russians is, A, why would they do it? Europe has been doing all of these false flags for the last several weeks. I'm more inclined to blame Europe for it. Why don't you shoot them down if you think it's the Russians? Why can't you intercept them if you think it's the Russians? How are drones able to fly all over your airspace and you're not able to do anything about the fact that drones are flying all over your airspace? And yet you want to have a war with the Russians. This doesn't seem like a bright idea. If you go back to Poland for a moment, you had dummy drones that the Russians notified Belarus, that notified Poland, hey, there are drones that are off course that are going to fly through your airspace. And they did not have the capability of shooting those things down. Most of those things just kind of landed somewhere. In other cases, they had to scramble F-35s in order to try to shoot down dummy drones. All right. If you can't deal with dummy drones, what are you going to do when the real things start flying and 800 is coming into your territory? You don't seem prepared. From the standpoint of Denmark, though, that's more fascinating. Now, the reason it's more fascinating is because if you remember, the United States had a drone flight that went on for months over military bases, over airfields, over pretty much everywhere across the United States, but specifically, not everywhere, Northeast. We couldn't do anything about it either. We had seemingly drones chasing other drones that we couldn't attribute to anywhere. In some of those cases, those drones were lingering for like 8 hours. It would stay from night to morning and then leave. And for whatever reason, also couldn't shoot them down, couldn't identify where they were coming from, couldn't stop them, even in military areas over military barracks or military airfields. So when I see the drones from Denmark or Sweden or what did some of these other countries, how do you immediately jump to the Russians when the United States had the exact same thing taking place? Now, the other part of this is, if you've noticed, there were flashing lights on those drones, meaning they wanted to be seen. And you have to ask the question, why are drones flying around Denmark, of all places? Beautiful spots, I suppose, but clearly want to be seen. And despite wanting to be seen, Denmark doesn't have the capability of shooting them down. People ask the US, why don't you shoot them down? And for whatever reason, they couldn't come up with an assessment on why couldn't they shoot them down. Now, Donald Trump, after the fact, gave a prosaic answer that I don't know how many people believe, but it was some level of an answer. But Europe is trying to, once again, use this to say, we believe this has something to do with the Russians. Now, they are calling an Article 4. Article 4 is just them coming together to talk about it. I don't even know why you need to call it an article, just saying we decide to meet to have a conversation about what's taking place. And so Denmark, I believe Sweden, there may be another country involved, has reached out to the US and to other countries of NATO to get some level of support to deal with drones. It's fascinating. It's by definition a UFO, even though these things have flashing lights, and UFOs don't necessarily have flashing lights in the way that these things are flashing. These just look like some kind of commercial thing. But they're trying to manufacture some kind of what it is, what being no, in the Russians, but it's not the Russians at all. But if it's not Europe, what they don't know in real terms what it is makes it far more interesting. To be honest with me, it was more interesting when it was in the United States. Now, they are going to use it for their own ends to scream that the Russians are invading their airspace, even though they can't necessarily attribute in real terms where these drones are coming from. The Danish Prime Minister came out, she gave a statement, I think it was about 7-8 minutes long, effectively saying, we don't know what these are, we're getting help from our allies, and we are going to try to come together to make an assessment, A, on what they are, and B, what to do about it. I don't trust Europe at this point, especially after the previous false flags. From my point of view, Europe themselves could be doing these drones in order to create some kind of consent or to advance the narrative that, hey, the Russians are just willfully, for no reason whatsoever, buzzing our airspace with drones. What would be the motivation to do that? What would be the reason? What would be the rationale? Putin has done everything in his power to avoid escalating with NATO, despite the fact that he had every right to attack capitals or manufacturing facilities that were supplying weapons to Ukraine to attack Russia, to go after Zelensky. He didn't do it. Meaning in every situation where an opportunity was provided for Putin to escalate the war, he chose to keep it very contained and very specific to Ukraine, accepting that NATO countries were going to give all of the weapons, all of the materials and everything else into NATO or into Ukraine to prosecute the war. He chose to avoid giving them any sort of reason to create some level of escalation. And in lieu or without any particular reason that Putin gave, they seem to be making their own. I have no idea where these drones are coming from. I have no idea if those drones are ours. I have no idea if those are NATO drones trying to escalate or advance a particular narrative. No clue at all. But beware, NATO, Europe are not to be trusted. They are in a desperate situation where the very credibility of NATO, or for that matter, European power in the world, and yes, that's an oxymoron, but European power, quote unquote, has been challenged and has been found wanting. They have fundamentally failed in their bid in Ukraine, humiliatingly so. So much so, Donald Trump is like, hey, this bag, Russia is doing horrible. Their economy sucks. So, I've been briefed. And in my briefing, I realized how bad Russia is doing. They look very bad. They look very bad on the battlefield. So I believe, Donald Trump, that Europe, buck up, kid. You can do it on your own. You can handle it. You can do it. You can figure out how to do it. And I believe, with your guidance and your money, that Ukraine can take back all of the territory. It's a very calculated statement. The statement effectively is trying to put it on Europe, give Europe the bag and give the impression that it is Europe that is effectively running with us. And on top of giving Europe the bag at the very end, where Trump is like, I wish all of you well. Why do you say that? You say that when you want to extricate yourself from something. I'll sell you weapons, but I'm out. Europe knows it. Europe knows it. So would they do something to try to create a provocation, to drag? It's not drag the U.S. into it. The U.S. is obviously into it with selling them weapons. But clearly they want the U.S. far more engaged than what the U.S. is to their liking. It's all of this drone stuff. Their way of doing it. I want to bring in my guest. Let's see him in the background. Craig, thank you for joining me, man. How you doing today?
Good morning. I'm well. How are you, Jamal?
I am doing well. Craig, I think this is Mokhiber.
Good enough. Mokhiber.
No. What is? I want to know. I want to be right.
Mokhiber.
Mokhiber. Thank you, Craig Mokhiber. He is an American former United Nations human rights official and specialist in international human rights law and mythology. And that is exactly what I would like to talk to you about this morning. Thank you for joining me, man. I really do appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
We've had a conversation on this channel, And there have been multiple opposing sides on this conversation. I am not a human rights lawyer. I am not part of the UN. And so us having a conversation about it doesn't necessarily amount to much of anything short of people giving their opinions. You are those things. And if I'm not mistaken, you resigned from the United Nations in protests. What is the law internationally on issues of genocide and the responsibility of countries in lieu of a country committing a genocide?
Yeah, and that's exactly the right question, Jamal. The discussions on the genocide in Palestine publicly often fall into matters of opinion and feeling. But genocide is a crime, and it is a crime that is specifically defined in international law, especially in the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. And that crime is defined with great particularity, right? We know what genocide is. We know what acts constitute genocide, and we know what kind of criminal intent is required for genocide. And in this case, what we're talking about is a series of acts that have to do with killing and harm and preventing births and so-called creating conditions of life designed to bring about this destruction of a group in whole or in part. And any of those things, even one of those things, when it is done with the intent to destroy a particular group as such, so a group based upon their race or religion or ethnicity or whatever, constitutes the crime of genocide. So it's not a matter of editorial opinion. It is a crime with specific actions that are defined and a specific kind of intent that is defined. And in the case of the Israeli genocide in Palestine, this has been evident from the very beginning, because you have a very unusual situation where the Israeli regime has been guaranteed absolute impunity by the West, especially the United States, decade after decade, to the point where it has come to believe that international law does not apply to it. And the result of that, Jamal, was that Israeli leaders have from the beginning been declaring their genocidal intent out loud. You don't have to dig through dusty government archives to find a smoking gun memo, because they've been saying it publicly, especially to their own people. And here we're not talking about marginal figures. We're talking about the president, the prime minister, cabinet ministers, at least 7 of them, the senior military commanders, and then all the way down the chain of command to soldiers in Gaza who declare what they are doing out loud. So there is no mystery. What is happening there is genocide. And yes, it imposes obligations on other states when that happens.
Now, what are those obligations? I read through the genocide, the convention itself. It's a lot of legalese. So break this down for me. What are the obligations on other states when a state is obviously, clearly, especially when you get the International Criminal Court, when you get the United Nations itself coming out saying they are literally committing a genocide, they are killing people, they are starving people. Full stop. It is no question. This is not our opinion. This is what is taking place. What are the obligations of states when this is declared that openly by the United Nations?
Well, the obligations are that you have the obligation of prevention. So they have to do everything within their power to prevent the genocide from taking place and from continuing. There is the obligation of punishment. So, here in the United States, for example, we have Israeli soldiers who are dual nationals who are flying back and forth between the US, participating in the killing in Palestine, coming back here and sitting in cafes in New York. Yes. That is in breach of US obligations of punishment of the crime of genocide. You have other sorts of obligations that relate to non-cooperation and non-recognition. So, you cannot, without being guilty of another crime in the Genocide Convention called complicity, so that's a separate crime, complicity in genocide, you cannot carry on providing, as the United States does, weapons and financial aid and intelligence and political cover and diplomatic cover and the use of the US veto in the UN Security Council to shield Israel from accountability without being guilty of the crime of complicity. And that means that both Joe Biden and his team and Donald Trump and his team have been guilty of the crime of complicity under the UN Genocide Convention. Now, this stuff, as you say, is legalese. Sometimes it's difficult. We have an advantage here, that Israel is on trial in the International Court of Justice for genocide. And in that genocide case, the International Court of Justice, the World Court, has issued a series of provisional measures, so sort of interim orders that relate not just to Israel, but to all states that are supposed to withdraw any support that is going into the regime that is perpetrating genocide. And of course, so at least from the time that, the original orders came out from the International Court of Justice, all states were absolutely on notice of their obligation to prevent genocide and to cut off all cooperation with it. And of course, many states in the West in particular have failed to meet their obligations, and some of them, like the US, have been directly complicit.
What do you make of people who make the argument that the convention is not necessarily saying that states should act individually, that everything that you said is true, but they're supposed to act as a collective under the auspices of the United Nations? Because there are some states that are hiding behind that are effectively saying, hey, we think this sucks. In fact, I'll go further. Nearly every country around the globe is still working with Israel. There have been some European states recently that have come around saying, okay, we're not going to give them weapons. We're not going to do this, or we're not going to do that. But for all intents and purposes, Europe has backed this, not just Europe, everywhere has continued to trade with Israel. And they would say, well, look, it's one thing for us to do something individually, but the United Nations requires us to work collectively and together in order to solve this issue, not as individual states. What do you make of that? Is that true? Is that false?
Well, that's a false reading of the convention. The convention, quite to the contrary, requires each state individually and collectively to meet their obligations associated with the convention. So a state does not have a get out of jail free card because they say they're waiting for some collective initiative to take place. They have an affirmative obligation to meet those responsibilities. By the way, all states have those affirmative obligations also under the Geneva Conventions that codify international humanitarian law. You are, as a so-called high contracting party of the Geneva Conventions, you're not only obliged to respect the rules in the Geneva Conventions, but you're also obliged to ensure respect by other parties over whom you have influence. So these are binding legal obligations on states to act individually as a minimum, but also to seek collective measures. And if there was any doubt in the minds, and there isn't, these are political arguments, right? They're looking for ways to avoid having to act, as we know. But if there was ever any doubt, a year ago last week, so in September of 2024, the United Nations General Assembly adopted overwhelmingly, 90% plus of the countries in the world adopted a resolution that codified the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice and the provisional measures in the genocide case in the International Court of Justice, and told states that they have to act now, including with issues of trade and aid and military supplies and all of those sorts of issues. So states have long been on notice of their obligation to act individually and collectively. And indeed, because genocide is one of the crimes in international law that sits above other principles of international law. So it's a so-called jus cogens norm, which means it applies at all times to everybody. There are no exceptions. And it imposes what are called erga omnes obligations, which means obligations on all states to act. It's one of those special rules of international law. So that means that every state is obliged to do everything in its power to stop it. Why? Because it's genocide. Because it's genocide. It's not something which was that when it was codified, there was a will to leave some legal ambiguity where states could debate whether they have to act or not. It is agreed, alongside the crime of aggression, to be a supreme international crime.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that breakdown. Is the UN General Assembly powerless in this process?
UN General Assembly.
Wait, before I get to that question, if all of those countries agreed with that, even to the point of codifying it into international law, how does those same countries trade, engage with, meaning they may complain, they may make speeches, but they still engage with Israel on this front? And maybe not every country, because every country may not have trade in that way. But I would wager to you the countries that did codify it were also some of the countries that still commit and conduct trade with Israel. That seems like a contradiction in terms.
It is a contradiction. In fact, it's a violation of their obligations. And you're right, even Arab countries in the region continue to have relations with Israel in ways that are inconsistent with their legal obligations. Complicity in this genocide is probably the second biggest story after the suffering of the Palestinian people, because the complicity has been everywhere. It has been in Western states in the first instance, but also states in the region, and even states in the global South that have, that get military supplies from Israel, that get intelligence cooperation from Israel, that get technology from Israel. There are some officials in a couple of African states and some South Pacific countries who embrace, because of their particular ideology, notions of Christian Zionism that tell them they can't do anything to defy the Israeli regime. So there's all kinds of complicity that extends not just to governments, but also to, for example, Western media corporations that have worked carefully to obscure what is happening on the ground, to hide the genocide, to disseminate Israeli propaganda, to even justify war crimes as they're being perpetrated. And we can talk a little bit about media complicity and what that means in international law as well. But complicity has been the second biggest story after the suffering of the Palestinian people in this genocide. It's what has made this genocide unique from other genocides. And by the way, Jamal, your viewers should know that there is no controversy about the finding of genocide. All of the major international human rights organizations, Palestinian human rights organizations, Israeli human rights organizations, UN human rights mechanisms, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, the broad community of international lawyers, all are in agreement that this is what I've called a textbook case of genocide, that there is no dispute genocide is being perpetrated here. So the idea that you would have such blanket complicity in such a clear case of genocide is especially worrying when we think about our own institutions and the way things are functioning here. But you asked about the UN General Assembly.
Yes.
The General Assembly has power. It has power that it has not used. Now, a lot of delegations feel very comfortable hiding behind the US veto in the Security Council. Some of your viewers will know that since this genocide in Gaza began 2 years ago, the US under Biden and Trump has vetoed 6 resolutions in the Security Council to try to make it stop. They vetoed it and vetoed it and vetoed it just most recently, just days ago. And so a lot of delegations will say, well, we tried, but the US blocked it. But that's not true, because they have power in the UN General Assembly. The UN General Assembly, 193 countries, all with one vote. There is no veto. And they have a mechanism in the General Assembly called Uniting for Peace, which is based on a resolution adopted in 1950 that gives them the power to take action with a 2/3 vote of the General Assembly when the Security Council is unable to act because of a veto. And that means today, the UN General Assembly could adopt sanctions, a military embargo. It could reactivate the anti-apartheid mechanisms that many activists have been calling for to deal with apartheid in Israel. It could establish a criminal tribunal. It could refuse to recognize the credentials of the Israeli regime in the General Assembly. And here, very importantly, it could mandate an international protection force to protect civilians, to facilitate humanitarian aid, to preserve evidence of war crimes, and to begin the process of reconstruction. It could do that today. And indeed, it's been called for by some states, and some states have even offered to provide troops for it. But fear of the United States and some others in the West has prevented that so far from happening. But there's a campaign to keep pushing to make that happen.
But 90% voted on the ICJ's ruling, and yet they don't have 2/3 that would say enough of this.
Well, I think the voting patterns in the UN General Assembly clearly show that the world does stand with Palestine and that the US and Israel are absolutely isolated. These votes typically have the only no votes are the US and Israel and a few South Pacific dependencies of the United States who outsource their foreign policy to the US, and a couple of far-right regimes from time to time. But essentially, it's the US and Israel against the world when it comes to these questions, because international law is so clear on what is required with regard to Palestine. And the resolution that was adopted a year ago was a very strong resolution. It was a historic resolution because of the substantive content, and it still garnered in excess of 90%. So I think it is entirely possible to get a 2/3 majority of a vote of the kind that we're talking about here if you can get a small group of states to have the courage to stand up to the United States and some of its allies, and to initiate the process in uniting for peace, there's nothing to stop that from happening. Now, we're not naive. You can bet that, especially under the current government, the US would use every dirty trick in its arsenal to try to prevent that resolution from being adopted, and then to prevent it from being implemented. But we have seen cases in the past, especially in the 1960s and 70s, where the same thing was true, but the global South, recently decolonized countries, came together, created a majority force, and then were able to do much more meaningful things through the General Assembly and other mechanisms of the UN over the wishes of the US and the United Kingdom and the French, for example.
Okay. Do you think that is going to take place? Because I guess I'm stuck in this box where Gaza is a little weirder than under normal circumstances than other things that have come up. I've heard people make the argument about Iraq. I've heard people make the argument about Vietnam. And as I pointed out to those people, this is neither of those things. In those cases, American troops were coming back in body bags, where the public didn't necessarily want those troops to come back in body bags. So they were like, we need to stop this war. We don't like this war. And they turned against the war as a direct result of the consequences that were coming back to America in that conflict. Well, this is not that. This is the US giving money, support, propaganda, political clout. There are no Americans that are coming back in body bags. So even though you may have Americans say, yeah, it's impolite for us to back a genocide, they don't care enough in the way that they cared about those other items. And that is my greatest concern with this. Public sentiment doesn't seem to be the thing that's affecting the political instrument at all. You may have the majority of Americans that may be against them doing this, but it still doesn't translate into political action. Democrats and Republicans support and back Israel full throttle. So if anything is going to take place, it would have to come through world effort. And if the world is afraid, for whatever reason they're afraid, then nothing happens. Oh, but correct me if I'm wrong, maybe that's a black pill.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the premises of your question are correct. This is a very particular situation politically. And we're in a very particular moment in history. I mean, I don't think I'll be bursting anyone's bubbles amongst your viewers when I say that the US doesn't have really a democratic system anymore. No. I mean, there's plenty of evidence of studies that have been done that shown that there is essentially no relationship between the votes that are cast by the Congress and the Senate in the United States and the preferences and views of the American people. There is no relationship. The votes that are cast relate directly to the desires of donors and billionaires and large corporations and foreign lobbies, not to what the American people want. And in this case, it's very clear that you actually have strong majorities who are horrified by what the Israeli regime is doing and who want the genocide to stop and who want the occupation to stop and all of that. So the American people are a force here, as they were during Vietnam. And what's remarkable here, and this is different from Vietnam, is the absolute degree of criminalization of dissent in this country and in some other countries of the West, where, I mean, it's a remarkable thing. You can criticize the US government, you can criticize the political philosophy of the ideology of the US, you can burn the US flag and nobody will punish you. But criticize Israel, criticize political Zionism, oppose Israel's abuses, and you can be punished under the law in this country because you are offending a small oppressive foreign regime. That's quite remarkable. And any other country, it's fine. You know, you can demonstrate vociferously against Iran or Saudi Arabia or DRC or Sudan, and you will receive no resistance, no flack, no punishment for that. But what we have seen in this country is that because of the horrors that are being perpetrated, because of the massive injustice that is being live streamed to people in this country, and because they know that it could not continue without US money and arms and diplomatic support and so on, people have taken enormous personal risks. You know, the students on college campuses, the people demonstrating and capitals, and have been willing to expose themselves to beatings and arrest and attack by Israel proxies and smearing and slander by public officials and being expelled from school and being fired from their job and being deported from the country in some cases, to stand up and oppose a genocide that the government and its donors support. That's remarkable, because that says to me that the resistance to this in many ways is even stronger than the resistance to the war in Vietnam. The problem is that so far, the government doesn't give a damn, because they're not answering to the people. They're answering to, as I say, to their donors. But it doesn't mean that they're impervious. And we have seen over time that positioning has changed. For the first time, you got several Republicans speaking out. You've got a growing number of Democrats and I'm not somebody who has a lot of confidence that that's where the solutions lie. I think it's a fundamentally corrupt institution, the U.S. Congress. But even there, you have seen remarkable change that we would never have seen just a few years ago. So there is this kind of change that's taking place, and it's not coming from some sort of moral epiphany on the part of politicians. It's coming from a moral demand on the part of the people, and in the long term, that's going to make a difference. All the studies, and you now have them forcing TikTok to be sold to a pro-Israel billionaire in order to make sure that TikTok doesn't tell the truth on Palestine anymore. You see how desperate they are to try to silence this, particularly when it comes to young folks, and that is going to fail. The trajectory is already there. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, please. No. Please continue. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to answer your question about why it's not happening. All these things we're talking about in the UN, because you say you're right. Internationally, it's really important, especially the global majority, is where change has to come from. So you have seen, for all the horrors that we've seen in the last 2 years, we've also seen something that is unprecedented in history. Israel, which has enjoyed absolute impunity, underwritten by the United States principally, has now in the last 2 years been subjected to a drumbeat of accountability that never existed before. Israel is on trial for genocide in the International Court of Justice. Its leaders, including Netanyahu, are the subject, have been indicted for crimes against humanity in the International Criminal Court. They have been condemned for genocide and apartheid by every major, as I said, international human rights, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, all of the UN human rights mechanisms, and so on. And you had this historic resolution in the General Assembly a year ago that said either you will comply within 1 year or you will face further measures, further consequences. So that's what that did, was that put Israel's allies, especially on the West, but also some in the region like Saudi Arabia. It doesn't call itself an ally, but effectively cooperates with the US and Israel on everything. Put them on notice. And what they have done is they have tried to shift the focus away from the kind of accountability measures that I mentioned and protection measures and those sorts of things that are really needed, and move away from the whole idea of genocide and talk instead about, well, we will recognize a Palestinian state. We will establish another endless, decades-long political process with maybe the promise of some kind of rump Palestinian Bantustan somewhere down the road, in order to shift the conversation and make sure that Israel is not held accountable in the ways that I said before. Again, sanctions and military embargo and a criminal tribunal, anti-apartheid mechanisms, the denial of its credentials, and so on. Those are all things that could happen. They're all things that should happen. But what they've done at the international level, including in the UN, is to try to shift the focus away now to this other meaningless, symbolic thing that would keep the Palestinians locked in for another 30 years, as they did under Oslo, with this smokescreen of the promise of a Bantustan. But what really happens is continued Israeli annexation, continued persecution of the Palestinian people, a continued flow of Palestinians out of their homeland, and the continued normalization of the Israeli regime. And that's the tug of war that's happening at the UN as we speak.
Yeah, it's a shiny object. But don't those other countries know that? Especially countries of the global south that went through colonialization, that is a history of European or US invasion, etc. Don't they know that that's what they're doing, that it's a shiny object, and that they're doing it in order, as Dimitri would say, a pressure release valve, to try to bring down the hostilities of their local population at the political space that is abetting a genocide without any real intention of doing anything about the fact that they're committing a genocide?
Yeah, they know perfectly well, and that's why some of them are going along with it, because it's an easy out. A lot of these countries either are complicit because of their trade with the Israelis or with the Americans. Some of them are just terrified of the US. a regime in the US that would not hesitate to impose sanctions, tariffs, you name it, to make life, cutoffs in aid and so on, make life very difficult for these countries. Now, in fairness, some of them are standing up. So that's why you get formulations like the Hague Group, this group of 9 countries, now 9 plus something like 30 that met in Bogota, that have said, we are going to take what the General Assembly has said, what the International Court of Justice has said, very seriously, and we're going to start implementing practical measures to cut off the Israeli regime in our ports and in our airports and in our trade relations and in our prosecution of Israeli perpetrators in our own courts and so on. So there is this growing resistance that is starting to spring up, that despite the threats from Washington and despite the smears from Tel Aviv, that is beginning to stand up. But you've got to build, as I say, a 2/3 majority in the General Assembly, which I do believe is absolutely possible with a little bit of courage and a little bit of leadership. And that leadership, interesting, it was President Petro of Colombia, who a couple of days ago, who stood before the General Assembly and called for accountability measures and called for the use of this Uniting for Peace mechanism that I mentioned in the GA, where there's no veto, in order to put together a protection force. And then we heard Indonesia step up and say, we will provide 20,000 of our troops for that. So there are states that are willing to get the ball rolling, but it needs to be bigger than that. You need a cross-regional group. So, for example, you could imagine the states of the Hague Group signing on to this resolution and then convincing some of their allies to do the same. You can imagine even some of the European states who have come forward with practical measures and very strong statements as well, like Spain, Slovenia, Ireland, potentially maybe some others, so that you could have a cross-regional coalition built around this that could actually get that resolution through. It's not a panacea and it's not guaranteed, but if it were to be adopted, it would shift the historic direction. It would change the political calculus of the Israelis and the Americans to some degree. Whether or not it's decisive is another question. It would change the incentive structures around the way Gaza and Palestine are dealt with these days. And it could signal a resurgence, a renovation of the UN General Assembly, which managed to accomplish a lot when the global majority was quite united during the Cold War.
Yes.
The global South. And then, has been very much fragmented and weakened over the course of the last 40 years or so, 30 years or so. You could see a return to that where it could be used for that purpose, particularly at a moment when, the U.S., I don't know if any of your viewers got to see Donald Trump's speech in the General Assembly. All my decades.
Yes.
Yeah, I've never seen a clown show like that. I mean, that was absolutely humiliating, insane rant. But he is very crudely attacking the UN, not just with words, but he's pulled the US out of several UN agencies and mechanisms. He's cut off funding. The US owes back dues in the billions of dollars. It's one of the biggest scofflaws in the United Nations. They will never pull out completely because they don't want to lose the veto. And that's a very powerful geopolitical force, but they can do a lot of damage. But they are attacking the UN directly. And then you have the Israeli regime, which is unprecedented in history, which regularly, it has murdered just in the last 2 years, 373 UN staff, many along with their families. Many more UN staff have been abducted by the Israelis and tortured and thrown into unlawful detention. UN compounds have been bombed and destroyed. UN convoys bombed and destroyed. They said this Secretary General is persona non grata. They have declared the UN a terrorist organization. They have smeared and slandered and lied about it and obstructed the UN. And yet they still have UN credentials, and they're walking around the hallways in Turtle Bay in New York City right now, bumping into some of their victims as they do so. It's outrageous, and the world will either stand together to stand up against this, or the UN will go the way of the League of Nations when it was afraid to stand up to the rising drumbeat of fascism and colonialism in the lead up to World War II.
Wow. I get the sense this may go the way of the League of Nations. I've often argued there is no such thing as international law. And you're kind of making my case for me. I mean, for all intents and purposes, as you point out, they are compelled to behave, to act. And the organizing body that is supposed to be the fulfillment of those obligations don't, even when people of the organizing body are murdered in the tune of hundreds, they still don't get involved. Like that, I don't know. That's a worrying thing. That's all. It's
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, that's a worrying thing. Craig, thank you for this. It was a great breakdown. I am so glad you explained that, because it's very legalese. And as you're reading through it, I can't get my words out. As you're reading through it, some of it it's a thicket to try to get through. So I appreciate your explanation and breakdown of this. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Always good to be in conversation with you. Thanks, Gerard.
Absolutely. You have a good one.
You too.
All right. We have Craig, and just to give his moniker, Craig Gerard Mokhiber. That's it, Mokhiber. He is an American, former United Nations human rights official and spokesperson or specialist in international human rights law, policy, and mythology. Shout out to him. Shout out to Dimitri for getting me that interview. He has my deepest appreciation. Let me go to my guests. So if I can pull this up, and come on. Join now. Let's see if he's there yet. And good, he's not there yet. All right. We're going to be joined by Professor Marandi. He is going to be here shortly. And I think I might have just heard him. Give me 1 second, guys. I have to set this up. StreamYard doesn't quite work with Iran. So yeah, I have to work this differently. All right, let me check. Okay, he's not here yet. Yeah, shout out to Craig. It sucks. It just sucks. Because the argument that Craig makes is, well, yeah, they have the capability of doing something. They just don't. And many of them don't for various reasons of fear. And on top of them not doing something, despite it's the United Nations and they're supposed to be the guarantors of all of these laws, they fail on these laws. It's like a cop just not following the law for hashtag reasons. Yeah, that's unfortunate. That's dispiriting. Because look, I know some people think it's a black pill for me to say that I think the U.S. is anesthetized most of the time. And while it may take a point of view of saying, "Oh, I don't like that, that's impolite," doing something about it is very different than taking a point of view of saying that's impolite. Those are two very different things. Am I willing to set myself on fire for it? Am I willing to lose my job for it? Am I willing to get beat by cops for it? Am I willing to, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, those are very different things. In the civil rights movement, it was understood why people were directly involved. The Vietnam War, directly involved. Iraq, directly involved. What about this? What about this? When, for all intents and purposes, it's your tax dollars that go, not, it's like, what do you put on the line for it? Other countries in Europe, Italy was tearing down Italy for it. Shout out to them. Those people are heroes. We have had kids who are willing to put their bodies on the line. Kids are always this kind of vanguard of these revolutions because they don't have jobs. What they risk is less, usually, but they're putting their physical self on the line for it. They're heroes, call them what they are. But there hasn't been this mass uprising in the States. And the political instrument, regardless of this kind of point of view shift that's taking place in regards to the public, hasn't shifted, hasn't changed, hasn't adjusted itself at all. In fact, what's taking place now is you would never believe who is back in the political conversation. This guy is back in the political conversation. Tony effing Blair. Tony effing Blair. Now, your question is, why is Tony Blair back in this political conversation? Because Donald Trump has had conversations with our vassals in the Middle East, and people can say whatever they want about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia just shot down a missile coming from Yemen that was aimed at Israel. So it's clear where their priorities lie. I hear my guests. I'm going to bring them in. Give me a moment. And emit. There he is. How you doing, man? You doing okay? But let me. Right. In fact, let me bring you in. I'm going to bring you into the audience now. Come on. There we are. All right. And this, and this. And I also need to do this. Okay. What's going on? There we are. Excellent. Professor Marandi, welcome to the show, man. I always appreciate you joining me. And just for the audience, Professor Mohammed Marandi, he's professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Professor, I have a few questions, and not all of them are on Iran. Have you seen Tony Blair being brought back into this conversation? Apparently, Donald Trump has spoken to various Arab leaders and has come up with a scheme where effectively the Arab leaders take on the responsibility of rebuilding, take on a military force to invade Gaza. And Donald Trump has given assurances and promises that he won't let Europe take the West Bank. I can't believe these leaders would believe Donald Trump on this, but whatever. They said that this was favorable in regards to the conversation that took place on the sidelines of the United Nations. And again, I would need to see the move on this. Either way, I would imagine even a force of Arab Muslim governments that are creating a military and invading Gaza, Hamas may still look at it at invading Gaza. And whatever takes place with Gaza is being imposed upon the population. They're not going to have a say in it. They brought back Tony Blair out of whatever rock he was hiding under the idea of seeing Gaza's indefinite interim government. Give me your thoughts on this.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Jamal. It's always a pleasure being on your show. I think there are a number of things here. One is that obviously no one can take anything Trump says seriously. And the very fact that they had a get together with Trump, I think, is pretty unnecessary, unless they went there to threaten him. All those leaders, the leader, I think Erdogan was sitting beside him.
Yes, he was.
I just saw a picture, so I don't know who was sitting at the table. But none of them seemed to be upset about the genocide. None of them were outraged that the United States under Trump, and of course before Trump under Biden, was a partner in this Holocaust. And then when they came out, they told nonsense about Trump's promise to protect the West Bank or prevent it from being annexed. We recall that when Trump said that he would not allow Qatar to be bombed again by the Israelis, literally a couple of hours later, Netanyahu said he'll bomb wherever he wants and whenever he wants.
Yes.
So who are we supposed to believe? Trump's words or Netanyahu's words? Obviously, Netanyahu has the final word. He's the man in charge. And so Trump is anything that he says is just nonsense. And we know how Trump changes his position every day, literally on so many different topics. So I don't take that as significant or important in any way or form. But what I think is interesting is the fact that the United States under Trump is making these proposals for Gaza. Obviously, Tony Blair has zero credibility as a war criminal, and he helped destroy Iraq.
Mhm.
We all know that. But the fact that they put forward this proposal shows that the situation in Gaza is not going very well for the regime. Of course, they're slaughtering kids day and night. They're slaughtering women day and night. They enjoy the slaughter. We've seen so much footage of Israelis speaking about how they're happy to see Palestinians killed, and that no Palestinians are innocent and all that. That is just, there's nothing really to argue here. But it's not going well anyway. They are not taking control the way they promised. And if you recall, at the very beginning of the genocide, Israeli regime leaders promised that this would be over quickly and they'd have a quick win. But it's been 2 years now. And I think this proposal is a sign that Netanyahu is not having the sort of success that he seeks. Even though, as I said, the people on the streets in occupied Palestine are very much with genocide for the most part. That's according to their own polls. These are not claims made by opponents of Israel. These are facts. But militarily, things are not going well. This proposal, I think, is a sign of that.
I agree with you. Otherwise, why would you need this proposal if Israel could do it on their own? They've been, and as I've told the audience, murdering kids, women and children is not indicative of winning a war. Like, we were able to kill, 5 million Vietnamese? We lost that war. We have proliferate capabilities in regards to bombing Afghanistan. We lost that war. So yes, you have the ability to murder women and children. Congratulations. That is different than winning a war. And I don't even like to call it a war. It's just slaughter. You're murdering the population to get a resistance force. It's not like they have nukes, not like they have tanks, not like they have any of these things. And yet, as you point out, 2.5 years has passed, and Israel is still exhausted at this point, and seemingly is trying to hand it off to other states to say, hey, now that we've murdered all of these people, can you please take over because our military is exhausted? No, I agree with you. I think this is indicative of them failing, not indicative of success. This is Donald Trump trying to save them once again. That's assuming he even is legitimate, right? Who knows if Trump is real about this? Do you think those states will go along with something like this?
Well, none of these states have any dignity or honor. None of them. And their leaders are shameless. And even the meeting itself and their one-on-ones with Trump, all of them were just disgusting. They were, sickening to watch.
Yeah.
If they had any dignity or honor, they'd use that opportunity to criticize Trump, to attack the Israeli regime, to shame American leaders. I mean, ordinary American citizens, American Jews, Muslims, Christians, people from all walks of life are, standing up against the regime. We saw, if you recall, a while back, a few people were telling, when Trump was at a restaurant, they were
Go Pink,
chanting slogans. And,
Go Pink, yeah.
there are lots of heroes, but these people sit with Trump and smile and laugh, and at the meetings they pretend something is being done. Nothing is being done. Nothing is going to come out of any of these meetings. This is just a means to buy time for the genocide. All of these countries continue to do business and trade. They either export oil, or they import natural gas, or they transport goods, or they do all of the above. And they have ties with the regime. If these countries had just ignored Trump and said that we don't want to have a meeting with them, that would have caused a splash. If these regimes had just sat together and said, we have collectively decided to cut off diplomatic ties with the Israeli regime and cut off business ties, that would have been the top news story of the month. But they don't do that because they are all complicit.
Yeah.
Erdogan is a part of NATO. His relatives are making money from the trade with Israel. The others are the same. They're all a part of this. So we shouldn't expect anything other than meetings with Trump and just empty words.
Yeah.
That's just who they are.
Yeah, agreed. I want to show you a clip and I want to get your take on it before I move to Iran. I saw this and I was fascinated by it, actually. Donald Trump met with Erdogan at the White House. And I hope you can see this. Does this work? Is this going to work? Okay. Watch what happens here. Watch what happens.
He took over Syria. Nobody knows it was him. You know what? He died. He took over Syria. Nobody knows it was him. I said, congratulations. He didn't want to talk about it. I said, they've been trying to do it for 2,000 years.
He points out that Erdogan took over Syria. He didn't want to admit it. Nobody knows it's him. Well, obviously, somebody knows it's him as you're pointing him out in the middle of a crowded room. And he says he didn't want to accept it. My thank you for it. Or at the very least, he didn't want to take ownership of it. Now, I'm fascinated by this because Donald Trump is clearly putting him on the spot for something that Erdogan doesn't want to own up to. And is saying this in the middle of the White House, in front of the press and everything else, meaning I'm putting you on the spot. I'm knowingly putting you on the spot for something that you don't want to own up and admit to. What the hell is this? What's going on here?
Well, why should the United States own it? This began with the Americans.
Yes, it did.
And ultimately, Operation Timber Sycamore was implemented in order to carry out this. But even before Operation Timber Sycamore, the Americans were working to overthrow the Syrian government.
Yes.
And it was all being done for the sake of Israel. Hillary Clinton said that. Jake Sullivan, of course, as we all now know, I've said it so many times. I keep saying this just so people remember. On February the 12th, 2012, he said, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. And you know, Jamal, I wasn't one of those people who believed that the official story of 9/11 was fake, at least for the first couple of years. And gradually, I began to have questions. Well, maybe after a year, when the war on Iraq was building up, then I started to have questions.
Yeah.
But gradually, there came a point where I didn't believe the official story, and that was when the dirty war in Syria began. It was clear to me that they were allies with Al-Qaeda because I hadn't seen this WikiLeaks email, but I knew that Al-Qaeda was working with Americans in Libya to overthrow the Libyan government, and then in Syria. And I knew this from people who'd been in Afghanistan working, in Pakistan and Afghanistan. I knew this from Iranians. I knew this from Syrians. I knew this from the Lebanese. And I knew it from some of my Turkish friends. But it was clear. But now I think people across the world are recognizing that 9/11 is, you can no longer accept the official version when you look at the way in which Jolani or Ashara is being welcomed in New York.
Yeah.
The head of Al-Qaeda in Syria and the co-founder of ISIS, the head choppers, the people who were carrying out slaughters and car bombs in crowded neighborhoods in Iraq and Syria in front of elementary schools, one which I was nearby when it happened in Syria, in Homs, a double bombing. They exploded a bomb and then people gathered, and then they exploded another bomb. Tens of children, elementary school children were killed. This guy is, after 24 years after 9/11, is back in New York. He's in New York, the same city where it was carried out.
Yeah.
And then you saw Petraeus,
that was disgusting.
gushing over him and saying, "I'm worried about you and how I'm a big fan of yours." Of course, Al-Qaeda and ISIS were American tools from the very beginning. Only the most naive, those who backed this dirty war, and I know many of these people, and some of them were very friendly to me until the dirty war began. And then they went in with Americans and they pretended that this was a blessed revolution, despite the fact that all the indications were that this was a dirty war. And then when the Syrian government was overthrown, they were all celebrating.
Yeah.
But they won't answer any of these questions. Was this or was this not a US-led operation? Of course it was. So were you cooperating to destroy Syria and to undermine Syria at the behest of the United States? And does the United States do anything that does not serve Israel's interests? So you were serving Israel's interests all these years. It's clear as day. It's obvious. There's no doubt about it. Anyone, they can be like 2-year-old kids and put their hands over their eyes and be utterly immature and you scream and yell sectarian, spout sectarian hate, but they can't hide the fact that this was an Al-Qaeda operation. And the Turkish president Erdogan, he was a tool.
Yes, he was.
He was one of the U.S. deputies in this operation. It was Qatar, it was Saudi Arabia, it was Jordan, it was of course Israel was involved as well. Israel was cooperating, the Israeli regime was cooperating with ISIS and Al-Qaeda alongside their borders. We all know this. So what Trump was saying is the obvious. Everyone who knows anything about this knows that he was deeply involved, but he wasn't the only one involved.
Yeah.
And now we know that all the strategic areas in the south are controlled by the Israeli regime, and we know that Ashara is desperate to do a deal with Israelis. He was quite okay with burning people alive and cutting people's throats and slaughtering people in Syria and Iraq, but now he as a genocide is taking place in Gaza, he wants to do a deal with the Israelis. Everything has, and I think we discussed this after Syria fell. If you recall, everyone was saying this is a catastrophe, and I said, actually, I don't believe this. I think this was a tactical defeat, but I think in the long run, this is not going to end well for the opponents of the resistance, because everyone is now exposed. All those in Doha, in Amman, in anywhere, those who are involved in all of this, they can no longer pretend that they're friends of the Palestinian people. They can no longer hide their hypocrisy. And Syria is going to become a black hole. The situation in Syria today is worse than it was when Assad was there, even under the most difficult circumstances. None of these countries with all their supposed wealth have done anything for the country. Everyone is just busy taking their piece of the cake.
Yeah. Betrayal thing was disgusting. It really was. I mean, keep in mind, they sent
I think, Jamal, I think he was excellent. I think it was, anyone who pretends that this was a revolution, that Al-Qaeda was good, that Al-Qaeda is somehow independent of the West or the United States, they have nothing to show for. They have to stop talking. They either have to admit that they were wrong and they did great harm, or that they're just being utterly dishonest. Petraeus was Ashara's boss. That's clear as day.
I accept that.
He was his boss.
The American troops that were told, you're going over there to fight terrorism, you're going over there to fight Al-Qaeda, et cetera, and then going into another country in order to have that fight. They, in their minds, I know people who went over there and fought, and still to this day believes we were there fighting terrorism, we were there fighting the person who committed 9/11, meaning all of these myths were given to these troops to put their lives on the line for ultimately a head chopper to end up in power. It's grotesque. That's all.
But a lot of these people are like those people who are supporting who who are supporting the dirty war in Syria. They're the same. Some of them knew this. Some, or at least they wanted to believe this. When you go and join the army, and they go and tell you to kill these people, either you have to quit and go to jail, and be seen as and pay a heavy price, or you're going to have to convince yourself that there is some, there's some, this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
There's no other, we have to do this. It's a necessary evil, although there's no such thing as a necessary evil, but it's a necessary evil. And if I don't do it, someone else will do it. They'll always have an excuse. So those people, who went and if they didn't see it till now, after watching Petraeus with Jolani, then they should be up in arms.
Yeah,
they should be outraged. They should be on the streets protesting, because it's now clear as day. Every single word that Petraeus said should be should be clear, that should make clear that the relationship between ISIS and Al Qaeda and the United States, and Jolani in particular and the United States, is one of master and slave. He is their product. He does as they wish. And Petraeus, so I'm worried about your sleep. Do you sleep well at night? And I'm a great fan of yours. Who talks like that?
Imagine telling the guy to chop head.
It sounds like someone's handler.
Yeah, it's like, are you okay, buddy? Have you been eating enough? You look a little thin, right? I'm worried about you. Yeah, that is a weird conversation. It's like this guy was chopping heads off, and Petraeus is acting like he's some kind of child. It's just bizarre, right?
Because they both chop heads off together.
Yeah,
that's there's no difference between these Wahhabi and Salafi Takfiri terrorists and Zionists and the U.S. U.S. military, and they're all the same. There's no difference.
Yeah.
But sometimes, just like if you recall when they had a rendition, sometimes they just let the torture be carried out by someone else.
Yes,
they wouldn't do it, except for in those CIA black holes or whatever, I don't know.
It's a black hole, black sites. It's a black for
black holes.
For all intents and purposes, it's a black hole.
Yeah,
but black sites.
Yeah, like in Thailand, but in the case of in the case of Egypt and other countries, they could just hand them over and let them do the torture, so your hands are clean. But your hands aren't clean. There's no difference between the person who sends them to be tortured and the person who tortures them.
Agreed. It's like me buying a hamburger. Yeah, I didn't kill the cow, but I'm eating the product of the guy who did kill the cow. Let's get to Iran for a bit for the last few questions. Non-proliferation treaty. Well, let's start here. The E3 states. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was said that Iran agreed with the 6-month plan that France put out. It agreed to work with the IAEA, meaning it agreed to all of the provisions that those states put out, and they still put the snapback sanctions in. And Iran is like, are you serious right now? Like, we agreed with your provisions, and you still implemented the sanctions. So Iran has come out and effectively said, all right, we're no longer going to work with the IAEA. Thank you for that. There's questions about the non-proliferation treaty, whether or not they're going to continue and just pull out of that. And there was a huge, let's say, group of congressmen that were pushing to get rid of the fatwa against nukes, effectively making the argument, look, we can have the fatwa against using nukes, but we should have them for security reasons. At first, did I get all that correct? And two, step into it for me. Give me your take on what's occurring right now in Iran over this.
Yes, in general, you have it correct. What I would say is that, remember, we had this discussion earlier about Iran negotiating indirectly with the United States, and I said that the Iranians knew that the Israelis and the Americans were plotting an attack.
Yes.
But the reason, first the Iranians refused to negotiate, and then the Americans changed their tone. And then the Iranians forced indirect negotiations, and they said that we'll negotiate indirectly in Oman. And the Americans didn't want this, but they accepted. So, but the Iranians knew that this was not going to end in an agreement. And the Iranians knew a couple of weeks, well, I don't know exactly when, but before the attack took place, the Iranians knew there was going to be an attack.
Right.
And even I knew. So, but the reason why the Iranians negotiated was because they wanted to both inform ordinary Iranians and people across the world and the global South that, look, we tried. They can't accuse us of, ignoring a possible solution through negotiations, because that's what they will do. They'll go and say, those in their Persian media, they have a host of Persian media, these Western intelligence agencies, really sinister people in this Iran International, Manoto, I don't know, BBC Persian, this huge network, and all sorts of websites and Telegram channels and cyber armies, thousands of people in Albania who used to be terrorists who fought for Saddam Hussein against their own country in the 1980s. They're in Albania now. Yeah. They work day and night. Each of them have tens of accounts in Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and what's it called, and Twitter or X. So the Iranians, in order to make sure that ordinary Iranians recognize that we tried, and for others to understand, they went through the motions. And it worked well for Iran. In this case, it's the same. Mm-hmm. When the Iranians negotiated in Egypt, I was saying to friends, and I think on different programs, that the snapback is going to happen. And I think it's pretty clear that it is going to happen.
Yes.
So why did Iran negotiate? Well, Iran, I mean, we should not get distracted by people online from different camps in Iran who are liberal or I don't know, or hardliners or whatever they're called. There are many camps in Iran. There are many different views. But the state itself, they negotiated for the same reasons that they negotiated indirectly with the Americans a few months ago. Because they wanted to show ordinary Iranians that, look, if there's escalation,
it's not us.
We tried.
Yeah.
They want to tell their friends in Moscow, in Beijing, and in the capitals of BRICS countries and Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries in the region, and their massive following, because Iran is now very popular. People across the world are looking to Iran for as their hope.
We are.
And the axis of resistance.
We are.
So they want to show everyone that, look, we are not the ones who are causing trouble. The Iranians knew that the French were going to, that they were lying. They knew it. They knew that the British and the Germans were lying. They knew their diplomats had no intention whatsoever to implement a deal. What they were hoping was that Iran would not agree, so that when they carried out the snapback, they could say, well, the Iranians refused to negotiate. But the Iranians outsmarted them. And they said, okay, we're ready.
Yeah.
And then they were stuck, because their diplomats are monsters. These are the same people who've been justifying, just like their journalists are monsters. Legacy media journalists. For 2 years, they've been, justifying a Holocaust in Gaza. These are the same people. They didn't come from the moon. These are the same people who've been doing everything they can to help the Israeli regime for the last 2 years. Even when they now, some of them, not all of them, have come out to say we recognize Palestine. They're not doing it because they love Palestinians. They couldn't care less for Palestinians. If the Israelis slaughter, Netanyahu today said there's no hunger in Gaza, and he said we're not killing civilians, and
he's a habitual
these
liar.
people.
Yes.
These people are no different than Netanyahu. He's just more crude. He's more. He's just there. As I said, it's like there's no difference between the person who enables torture and the torturer. There's no difference. The American official who sends someone to be tortured in some dungeon in some country, he's a torturer too. He's no better than the torturer. They're the same. So these politicians, these diplomats, these Western journalists, they're all like that. They're all, they do what their Zionist overlords want them to do. They're not going to do anything different. So when they accept Palestine, they're only doing it because people have woken up.
Mm-hmm.
They want to silence their people because the outrage across England and the UK and France and Germany and the United States and South Korea and Japan and Australia is growing. So they have to do something to appease the protesters, those who are angry.
Agreed.
So this is just an empty gesture. Nothing.
Agreed.
There's not going to be a Palestine because of their statements. Although this is a good sign, it shows that they're on the back foot. It shows that they're in trouble. It shows that the resistance, the global resistance, the popular sentiments in support of the Palestinian people against the Holocaust, that they're having an impact. That these regimes are having to take even token steps is still important. So the Iranians knew that the French were lying. They knew that the Germans and the British were lying. They knew this was just these negotiations were fake, so that then when they pull out, they can blame the Iranians. But a ruse. But what happened was that the Iranians outsmarted them. Just as the Iranians outsmarted the Americans over the negotiations, the Iranians knew that the Israeli regime would strike. The Iranians did not know that they're going to strike the leadership.
Right.
That was a major miscalculation. It was a failure on the day one of the war. Was a failure, no doubt about that. But they knew that there was going to be attack. But they thought it would be like the previous attack where they bombed anti-aircraft sites, and they thought that they'd do that again and probably bomb the nuclear program. But they didn't think that they were trying to they'd go after a regime change, because that would be a whole new situation. But ultimately, the Iranians hit back, and the Israelis, they lost the war. There's no doubt that the Israeli regime lost the war. But the reason for these negotiations and these agreements was because the Iranians knew what was happening. They knew what these people were trying to do. And just, for example, I've just had, I meet people, like relatives, friends, colleagues at university. There are people who always have questions because they're watching these Persian media outlets and they're saying, well, why didn't Iran do this, or why didn't Iran do that? Even though they know that the American regime is sinister, the Israeli regime is sinister, but these people, these Persian media outlets are constantly raising these questions. So what the government did, what the state did, I think was very, very smart.
Yeah.
And that they, basically showed to everyone that, look, we tried.
Agreed.
We tried. It isn't our fault. And that makes internal unity stronger. And it creates greater global sympathy.
It also makes it clear that you can't negotiate with monsters. It makes it very clear to the domestic population. Look, we tried to negotiate with them.
Oh,
They,
yes.
clearly weren't being
Absolutely.
honest, just like they weren't being honest in the previous negotiations. Like, it builds a sentiment within the context of the public itself.
Jamal, I have university students and former university students who've been contacting me since the 12-day war. And so many people's views have changed.
Mm-hmm.
Some young people apologize and say, I was always against you and I hated you, or I thought you were talking nonsense. And now this is how it's done.
Yeah.
You have, the state has behaved in a way where they've been exposed. The Americans, the Israel. And it's not just Trump. I think we went over this once. When the 12-day war started, CNN hates Trump. They started talking about, I saw a clip of Iranian sleeper cells in the United States.
Yes. That's the way.
Right?
That's the way everything works.
these woke monsters, these woke beasts who speak about 1,001 genders, they were intentionally demonizing Iranian Americans, many of whom never been to Iran. Many of them who'd married non-Iranians, had never been to, many had never been to Iran, many had never been to Iran since childhood.
Mhm.
They have nothing to do with Iran. But they demonized them and said these people are all dangerous. Why? Because they wanted to strengthen the case for war against Iran. So they were in bed because they're all, this Zionist force. I mean, you saw what Tucker Carlson said, and we all knew it. He didn't have to, we all knew that,
No.
the Zionists are in charge. It's not even Netanyahu. It's the Zionists who are in charge. But we all know that whether they're Democrats or Republicans, their overlords are Zionists. So when Trump attacks Iran, CNN is going to play the same role as Fox News, but in its own way, and using its own language,
Yes.
being more, more subtle, less bombastic, and all that. So they spoke about these Iranian sleeper cells. Well, where are these sleeper cells? Why did they carry out any terrorist attacks? Because they knew they were lying. But next time around, they'll say the same thing all over again. Talk about sleeper cells and all that to create fear among ordinary Americans to help support any attack on Iran. The next time the Israeli regime attacks Iran, watch how the Western media justifies
they're
it.
going to do
They'll do whatever they can to make it seem legitimate.
They will do the same thing. I'm curious whether or not the politicians and I guess there are two questions with this. One, do you have the same sense that they're using the non-proliferation treaty, the not working with the IAEA, as a pretext to create some kind of fake justification for an attack? I had Colonel Wilkerson on the show. Colonel Wilkerson made the point of saying there will be an attack before Thanksgiving, meaning in his mind, they are gearing up for this in order to do this. I've heard other people who say, well, they clearly don't have, let's say, the air superiority, or the very least the capabilities, meaning they know that their capabilities are very diminished in just because of the first 12-day war. Why would they do this again? Give me your take on this. How is Iran thinking about this? And just to piggyback on this, Iran released documentation about the nuclear facilities. They released about IAEA Grossi being spied on by the Israelis. I think it was 3 videos that they released. I interpreted that as this kind of, well, first, let's answer the first question first before I bring this into it.
So what was the first question?
I'm sorry. That was my fault. I was thinking too much. In the way that you said that they knew that they were going to be attacked in the first 12-day war, do they have that sense now? Are they thinking something very similar to the first 12-day war, where either Israel or the US or both are gearing up for some sort of attack using, let's say, the non-proliferation treaty or the IAEA pullout as a fake justification for that attack?
Well, first of all, if our nuclear program has been obliterated, as Trump keeps saying, then why would they want to bomb Iran? There's no justification. But you'll see whenever they do attack, you'll see the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, all of them, the BBC, Sky News, The Guardian, quote, unnamed intelligence officials saying that, there's, how it works.
Yeah.
And so they'll justify it, and then we'll have the sleeper cells, and we'll have everything. We'll have all the propaganda necessary to justify war, and you will have foolish people who will believe it. But I agree with something that you said a minute ago, and that is that the Israeli regime does not have the upper hand. They lost the war. I mean, it's clear as day. Steve Bannon is no ordinary person. Steve Bannon knows what's going on behind closed doors. When he says that Trump saved Netanyahu during those last 3 days of war, 2, 3, 4 days, I don't remember exactly what he said, the Iranians were hammering them, and he saved Netanyahu. He knows what he's talking about. So the Israeli, and now the Iranians obviously are in a better position than they were back then, because Iran was not going to be caught off guard like last time. Iran is, has seen its weaknesses. They're working to make sure that they don't have the weaknesses that they had last time. They see their strengths. They'll try to improve those.
Mm-hmm.
So Iran did, and the Israelis gave it their best shot. So the Iranians are obviously going to hit them back harder next time round. So it may seem foolish to you and me for them to carry out an attack, but these people are not rational actors. You saw Netanyahu just speak, I don't know, in front of the UN. These are crazy people.
Yes,
these are mad people. I mean, all genocide, all Zionists are crazy, and they're sick, they're mad. These supporters of genocide, when you watch their speeches and their gatherings and the way in which they justify what they do, they're not normal. So don't expect rational thinking and rational behavior from these people.
I know.
If they were rational, we would not, we would not have over, well, I know I'm speaking to your audience. We wouldn't have well over, and I know your audience is politically aware, and so I'm basically speaking to
It's
myself.
fine. No, it's fine. It's fine.
So for well over 2 decades, we wouldn't have this.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have these endless wars, and the United States just going downhill. And now, I mean, I'm no fan of Charlie Kirk. He said many ugly things, and but it's it's clear as day so far, unless the FBI releases the footage that they are that they're holding back to show otherwise, it's clear that the official story is bogus. And if that what is it that was on his chest? If it is true that he was killed by that what is it, a mic or what? I don't know. You call it the. I don't know.
You mean sniper rifle?
Sorry.
The sniper.
Sorry?
You mean Kirk getting killed?
Well, you know that now they're saying that, I don't know if you saw what you've seen over the last few hours, but they're talking about the mic on his shirt. These new mics that they have, which have magnets. You put it on, they're wireless.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, some are saying that this exploded. Anyway, and the argument, the footage that they show is a bit is strange. Whatever the facts are, the official story is bogus unless they start showing footage to show that they're not lying. But the point that I'm making is that if it is true that they killed Charlie Kirk, that it was not just some crazy kid with,
Yeah.
If that's true, it just shows how I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised, because these people are not rational actors. They pretend that they are rational, but that facade is gone. The mask has been removed for the last couple of decades, or more than the last 2 decades. And so,
like you're saying, you expect an attack.
I cannot say for certain that an attack will happen, but the assumption in Iran, they're working based on the belief that it will happen.
Okay.
No one can say it will happen.
Yes,
for sure, but the belief. So they're rebuilding, and restructuring and strengthening both military capabilities, but also civil society, because we know that these Zionists, that they have no problem with slaughtering women and children.
No, they do not.
So protecting senior officials, protecting their families. This is something that is, more. There's more focus, but there's always going to be, there's when they hit, they're going to hit. I mean, last time around, I recall people they asked me to get rid of my phone. And if I done that, I couldn't do interviews. I'm using my phone right now.
Yeah.
So if it happens again, I will have to use my phone.
Yeah, I was deeply concerned.
Regardless of whether I'm a target or not. So there's some things that will or will not happen, but Iran will be stronger next time around and more prepared than last time.
Last question. Talking to Colonel Wilkerson recounts that Donald Trump had a conversation with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu says, well, I'm going to use nukes. Because as you pointed out, they were getting battered and they were running out of air defense. And apparently they were shocked and surprised that Iranian missiles could hit them, meaning they went into this thinking we're not going to get hit and we're not going to take a beating. And they took the worst beating of their existence, and they were shocked by the whole thing. When it became clear that we can't extricate ourselves from the war, we're not prepared for a longer war, we need help, in which case Donald Trump gets involved. But the way the conversation goes, Netanyahu went to Trump, in which Trump says, don't do that, I'll settle this and I'll get you. That is always going to be the end question within the context of any kind of war with Israel. What's the thought of that? If Israel uses a nuke, let's say Iran pummels Israel, and Netanyahu, who I firmly believe is perfectly willing to fire off a nuke, what happens after that? And everybody that I've talked to has no answer for that. Like, you have military, hard-nosed military guys that have been in the military for like 30 years. They're like, I have no idea what happens after that. From the Iranian point of view, what's the thought process in that?
Okay, well, here I'm going to say some things which are a bit different from what I usually say.
Please.
But let me be very blunt to your viewers. Ayatollah Khamenei is a unique person. He's very unique. He is utterly moral, and he's very principled. Just like Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. I was in Beirut when he was martyred last year. I was a few hundred meters away from him. It was, those days were among the most painful days of my life, because I loved that man immensely, and so did Lebanese. I mean, those who were principled, not those who were factional and funded by Westerners, or funded by people who were funded by the West. Well, anyone who had any decency, had great respect for Nasrallah. Why? Because he was a man of principle. And let me put it this way. We cannot support anything immoral. When, for example, why do we support the Palestinian people? We cannot be indifferent. Why do we support the Palestinian people? Because there's a genocide going on.
Right.
And before that, it was because they were being ethnically cleansed. In principle, we have to support them, just like we supported the resistance in South Africa, just like how we support the Venezuelans or the Cubans. The Cubans are not, it's a communist party which has traditionally been hostile towards religion, any religion. But for us, it's the principle that there's a oppressive regime, the United States, I think it's a small country.
Mm-hmm.
So these are principles. Now, some, they say in politics, there are no principles. For him, that's not the case. For Nasrallah, that was not the case. And tomorrow is his anniversary the anniversary of his martyrdom.
Yes.
For Ayatollah Khamenei, it's the case. Now, they can say he's an evil monster, he kills his own people, I don't care. I mean, that's the same Western media that's been supporting the genocide for the last 2 years.
Yes.
So anyone who who believes anything that they say, I'm not even trying to convince that person. I don't really care what that person thinks, because that person has decided to think otherwise. He is extraordinarily principled, Ayatollah Khamenei. And when he says that, and Iran has never, the Americans have said in American intelligence agencies that after 2003, Iran stopped building a nuclear weapon. No, Iran never build it, was never working to build a nuclear weapon. Never did the state make a decision to build a nuclear weapon at any point, and there's no evidence for that. And as I told you once before, or maybe more than once before, during the Iran-Iraq war, when the West was giving Saddam Hussein chemical weapons to use, people went to the leader at that time, Imam Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, and said, look, we need to make chemical weapons. And he said, no.
Right.
And the West, by the way, was not only giving Saddam chemical weapons, but they were blockading Iran, trying to prevent Iran from purchasing gas masks.
Mm-hmm.
I think I told you maybe you once that my gas mask was North Korean. Anyway, so when Ayatollah Khamenei says no nuclear weapons, he says it out of principle, that this is a horrible weapon that targets ordinary people. But also there are other reasons for it, because if Iran gets a weapon, then everyone in the region would want a weapon. And a lot of these regimes are unstable. The Republic of Azerbaijan is run by a family dictatorship. And Aliyev, he used to gamble and lose all his money. And there was a time when Iran funded him, to keep that country stable. You have the Persian Gulf. You have all sorts of countries in this region which are not inherently stable. The Emirates is not inherently stable. It's a family dictatorship with millions of slaves and indentured servants. How could you call that stable? It's stable today, but that doesn't mean it'll be stable tomorrow. So having a nuclear weapon has many negative consequences, potentially. However, Dr. Larijani, who is now the head of the Supreme National Security Council, last year he wasn't the head of he wasn't the chair of the chair of the council, which is basically the head of the council in the absence of the president. Before this, he said once on TV, but he was an advisor to the leader. He said on television that if there's an existential, I'm paraphrasing, if there's an existential threat to Iran, Iran's nuclear posture will change.
Okay.
Dr. Kharozi said this twice too. He was another former foreign minister and an advisor to the leader. He said it twice before Dr. Larijani said this. These are not, Dr. Kharozi, when he spoke, since he said this twice on two different occasions, it's clear that he had authorization to say that.
Right.
Someone gave him the authorization to say it when he said it twice.
Oh, I see.
And right? So today, Iran's military capabilities are clear. Iran's missile program and drone program is probably the third best in the world. Perhaps in some ways, possibly second. But Russia, China, and then probably Iran. And of course, Iran has other capabilities too. But Iran is one of the 10 countries whose nuclear technologically is very developed in the nuclear field. Iran has many scientists. They can murder scientists. Actually, the day before yesterday, a student at my university, at my faculty, she said that her father owns a couple of apartments in a building, and they hit that building and murdered a family. Apparently, the Israelis were targeting that family. So they just an individual. So they just murdered the whole family, and wrecked the building that that her father was owned part of. That's just how these Israelis are. That's how these Zionists are. They don't care. They don't care about human life. So, but going back to, Iran has nuclear capabilities, and now Iran is at the least that it's going to do is going to fully suspend cooperation with the IAEA. And so that makes it very difficult for the Americans to assess where Iran is. I have no doubt that Iran is not going to develop a nuclear weapon. But
really,
I don't believe that Iran has the intention, because that's what the leader says, and when he says he means it. That's who he is.
Okay, I see.
Just like Nasrallah, just saying Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was a person that was another unique person. These are people who they will be, the reality of their personalities will be discovered in the years ahead. But in any case, I have no doubt that Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon. But Iran's capability to shift policy in a meaningful way is there.
I see.
And Iran's capabilities are so immense that it can be done very easily. It's not difficult for Iran. So the Israeli regime has no advantage. But what it does show is how barbaric the regime is, and how barbaric the Europeans are, and how barbaric the Canadians and the regimes and the elites are. That they are supporting a regime that will do anything to anyone.
Yes.
They rape people in prison. The footage is leaked, and then people go on the streets in Israel to protest and say we should have the right to rape people.
Yes.
This is this is who they are, and this is what the West supports. That's why no one anymore they should believe anything that the West says when it comes to Iran or the axis of resistance or Israel or Palestine or anything like that.
Professor, I really appreciate this conversation. I just want to nail you down on something very specific. You were pointing out that if Iran is threatened, the nuclear posture may change in a direct response to that threat. And I guess my thing is, it's being threatened. Israel will lose. And it seems like they're trying to create a context or justification, because that is the only thing that they have at their disposal that has potential to be, let's say, overtly destructive. So, as I always tell you, be safe. I appreciate these conversations. I really do. Thank you for it. And for the audience, Professor Mohammed Marandi, Professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Professor, you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for this.
You too, Jamal. Have a great day.
Thank you. Be safe. All right. We have come to the end. And we've come to the end. We have come to the end. Shout out to Professor Marandi. He has my deepest appreciation for joining me on the show. It went a little long. What time is it? Yeah, it went very long. But that's okay. I appreciate him for joining me. There were specifics that I was trying to hit. That's all. There were very specific things. I have asked this question after Colonel Wilkerson pointed out that Netanyahu was willing to use it. And he is. I strongly believe it. And what happens after? I've asked that question to people who work for the CIA. I've asked that question for people who work for the Pentagon. And all of them have demurred on that question with, and I don't know. I think it was, what is his name? Ray McGovern. I think Ray McGovern pointed out Pandora's box has effectively been opened, which means he doesn't quite know what it means. I don't quite know what it means. And I suspect Professor Marandi may not know what it means either. So, I don't know. Look, when you have a government of religious maniacs and they are trying to bring Jesus back, at the very least Christian Zionists, this is not a rational government at that point. There's rationality in a specific context of believing that they can take land and territory with a blank check from the United States. That part's true. But let's be clear. Iran, I strongly suspect in that war, it holds back because it knows that Israel always has a nuclear option. If that nuke is released, then that holding back goes away. It will be the end of Israel because Iran will probably at that point have nothing left to lose. But who knows? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. Let's go to chat real quick. The well-dressed nerd, Jamal. The way you feel about Alex is the way I feel with you. And share, what is this? And share with fault lines back in the day. Still, I'm happy to have you disagree with. Yeah, Look, man, this show is built on a disagreement, right? It's like, hey, man, we have the similar ends, but Jesus, how we think we're going to get there. No, Brave, I totally feel you, man. Look at it this way. I love having Alex on. And Alex can come on every week if he wants to. I don't have to agree with him. I'm not going to flip out over it. I'm not going to leave the set, especially since it's my set. No, I enjoyed the disagreement with Alex. And sometimes I do want a different point of view because I can be wrong, right? Even though I strongly think Alex was wrong in his view of Trump. I would bet my left testicle that he is wrong on his view of Trump. But, it doesn't matter, right? It's our point of view. Is what it is. I appreciate him. I appreciate his take. And he seems to be very earnest with that take. So I enjoy having him on the show to give that point of view. Let's see. This is Alexander G. The mystery drones in Denmark and Norway are the same UFO that have been flying in New Jersey for a year. There is no way the Russian military drones will be flying with blinking lights. Look, I agreed with the blinking light stuff. Christmas lights. Russia has no incentive in sending drones through Denmark. Why would they do that? Why would they do that? Also, you think to yourself, electronic warfare, why is that not used? Why don't you shoot them down? There's that. How far is Russia from Denmark? And how the hell is a drone going to fly all the way from Russia to Denmark? There's that. If you do fly a drone, oftentimes the battery life, few hours? It doesn't make sense, right? But by the same token, it didn't quite make sense in the US either. So, Alexander, fair enough. I wouldn't put it past Europe to put up their own drones in order to create a false flag pretext. That is the other one. You can't put it past them. They've been using the false flag for drones for the last several weeks. Why would it change now? So, Alexander G, I take your word for it, though. I take your point earnestly. We have been having drones flying around in the United States. Why they immediately assuming that they're not the same drones? Agreed. All right. I am going to call this a day. By the way, 70K. The show has officially hit 70,000 subscribers. We're not at the promised land yet, and I want to hit 100,000 before I drop dead. But we've hit over 70,000 subscribers. Fucking A. Now, ended on that. When I have the show on Saturday, I'm going to keep it at the same time at 8 o'clock on Saturday mornings. We will celebrate the 70K officially. This is kind of a, by the way, 70K day. But I'll celebrate it officially on Sunday. My Sunday, your Saturday, when we do the show. You all have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for joining. Like, share, subscribe. You can support PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, etc. All of those things effectively help. Be safe. Be kind to the degree that you can be kind. And I'll see you Saturday, 8 p.m. Have a good one all. Be safe.